Guten Morgen, or I don't know if I did that better or worse than Oscar does. Um, how's everyone's day? Make sure everything is working correctly. Real quick, we'll get started. All right, yes. So, definitely stayed up a little bit working on our technology, but not too crazy, because if you were here for yesterday, the after Q&A session spoiler-free thing kind of spiraled horribly out of control and ran way over. Now, that kind of thing is what I kind of hoped to be doing all along, or that kind of interaction. I mean, that was only a few hours relative to the amount of time, that same amount of time spent going through YouTube comments and so forth, is just this tiny slice of interaction and answering questions and having a dialogue compared to last night. So I apologize, especially to everyone who was much further in time zones last night that it went for a long time. Um, I appreciate how many people stuck around. So, um, yeah, I know it went and went. I oh, well, I'm gonna start putting these up on YouTube, the full strips, the full clips of things. Just haven't gotten quite to that yet. What I will probably do, and I'll introduce them at the time, is that I'll put them up for now so that everyone on YouTube can kind of see what's going on over here. The people who can't make it um, in sort of unedited form. Um, and then after this run is over, I'll probably just unlist them from the channel, but you'll still be able to get them from the website. And then I think what I'll do is sit down and try to cut it down into a bunch of highlights, skipping through the whole series, to make something a much shorter for one thing, but much more, I think, palatable as far as presentation goes. So, yeah, it went, and we're not going to do that today. One of the things I am trying out today is changing how I fetch clips and so forth. I have only set up to work for the first episode, but if it's successful, then starting tomorrow's and forward, we'll do it all the time. So I have a little more delay today. It's throwing me off just a bit, but yeah, it's a lot of editing. But it's that's a different kind of editing than what I've done to this point, and so it's the kind of thing I need to learn how to do anyway, I think. And yeah, so I'll eventually, probably all of this will be up over the course of the actual event, because the YouTube channel has nothing else going on right now, for one thing. But I know a lot of people can't get to it. A lot of people don't know you can come and get the clips from Twitch, but they'll also only last a couple of weeks, I think. And so they will clutter the channel, so I won't leave them up permanently. So, yeah. All right. Yeah, I know there's a lot of like mini rants, especially from last night's, like the death of the author one that Born Free is talking about. And yeah, you're right. The Fly Me to the Moon, the original, changes the feel of it. I understand, but it's one of those things where it's not just fluff, it's not just aesthetic, right? So yeah, without further ado, let us get on to business. Maybe. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'll probably just start that with the playlist. That's probably a good idea. So, episode 9. We continue our exploration of Asuka as a character, right? Like I said last night, she got such an introduction. It was very clear this is a big deal, big change in the series, and if you had just now watched these episodes after that, it should be very clear how much she changes the feel of things. not just the tone, not just the possibility for comedy and for interesting scenes, but the way Shinji himself suddenly has to react, has to act with everything. So this episode begins with Asuka, the transfer student, of course, being the focus of everyone's attention, right? She becomes kind of the center of everyone's focus for a minute, both in a kind of positive way and a, I don't know, maybe a negative way. I mean, obviously there's buzz around new transfer students. You can see kind of everyone happy to see her at that moment. But as it goes on, the guy's focus gets a little more sketchy, a little less wholesome. So we again have the voyeurism of adolescent, us kind of seeing through these adolescent boys' eyes, which has some unfortunate things. Hey, welcome. Glad I know we'll have less people today just because it's the weekday and not the weekend, but I hope this also means more different set of people will be able to make it. Anyway, Asuka. We talked yesterday about how she presents with her femininity. She's very self-aware of her burgeoning sexuality and uses it, wields it a little bit like a weapon, right? And alongside that, we learned that she is wants to be the best, highly competitive, seems to derive some of her happiness, purpose, meaning from the attention of being the best, of showing off. She does all that to try to put Shinji in his place and show everyone what she can do, right? But so you would think all this attention, right? You think all this attention from the school would be something she wants, or from all her schoolmates, right? And the truth is, all the guys start inventing these rumors about us. Guys have these, like, they're inventing these fantasies in her head that she's. You can see the girls' opinions kind of sour on her over time because of all this attention. We have this, and we have Koji and Kensuke put in exactly the same position that Shinji was in when everyone was raving about Misato. It's like, man, if you only knew what she was really like, right? And instead, though, instead of enjoying all the attention that Asuka is getting, instead she is oopsie. Rather than relishing it, I guess is what I'm saying. Rather than it being just any attention that Asuka likes, we find out that that's not how she feels at all. She gets the massive love letters and all the attention from the guys, but her reaction to that is to stomp on it, right? And so, obviously she is not interested in any attention whatsoever. It's not just acclaim. It's not just any kind of form of attention, right? But she will go in a moment here and intentionally seek out Rei, right? And so it's not attention for attention's sake. It's specifically the recognition of other people involved in NERV and her other pilots. That's who she's actually competitive with. She doesn't care, I don't think, that she's the center of the boys' attention to the chagrin of all of her female classmates. Not at all. I think instead, attention or beating other Ava pilots, being the best at that, is the only thing that matters to her. So it's a nice little detail to show her stomping all that. Because other than that, it kind of looks like she's the new school idol, the center of everyone's attention, this exotic foreigner. And Yeah. Why are the shoes labeled? Yeah, I think because of the indoor-outdoor shoes, so they actually stay in a cubby most of the time. Um, anyway, you would think maybe she just doesn't care anything about anything at all, but then we have her actually go to be Rei. Just like with Shinji, she wants to stand above. She wants to be above. She wants to loom over them. She, at first, even insists on getting in her light, and Rei, in what we've come to learn is very typical Rei fashion, just kind of doesn't confront the problem, just tries to fix it, tries to move out of the shade and keep going. But we have kind of an interestingly honest exchange here, where Asuka introduces herself, and everyone's here for this exchange, but Asuka doesn't care. And she says, let's be friends. And because it's best for everyone that way, for various reasons. Isn't that surprisingly honest between the two of them? It is, she thinks it's going to be expedient. And she doesn't mind admitting that it's easier for everyone if we're friends. Not that I want to be your friend, or I've heard things about you, or I admire you. Nothing at all, except that it's pragmatic. And she doesn't know Rei, I don't think at this point. Definitely doesn't know that appealing to her sense of pragmatism would probably be effective. I thought that was a surprisingly, no BS way to introduce yourself, right? The text... Oh, thanks for the info, Shreer. So the text Rei is reading here is German, but is mostly nonsense, evidently. Wow, so I'll scroll up if you missed it. Henry with no vowels is adding some little details to our reading. It's pretty interesting, actually. Anyway, so this exchange just... I don't think it goes the way Asuka hopes for, right? After dealing with Shinji, I think she is maybe expecting more of the same. Maybe expecting... She learns she can get reactions out of Shinji. And as we saw last time, in a pinch, Shinji will take the wheel. He will, in fact, react, push back, and all that. And I don't know if she's expecting the same thing from Rei, or she's expecting Rei to submit. But instead, Rei gives us a even more sort of mercenary answer. Said, I'll be your friend if I'm ordered to. And she doesn't get upset about this. She, in fact, just thinks that's strange, which, of course, prompts them to wonder, is it only weirdos that actually get the pilots? That's probably more profound than the guy realizes. But anyway, you can tell just from this initial exchange that Asuka has no clue what to make of Rei. And so she's actually mirroring what Shinji went through when Shinji was trying to get a sense of Rei. Now, because Asuka's personality is so different, she attacks it head on, right? And it doesn't seem to work any better than Shinji's attempt, at least as far as trying to get a dialogue going. Now, Rei has been kind of off stage for a couple of episodes. We talked about that. She only shows up briefly that one time. And I think part of that is to give Asuka room to come in on the stage. And now that Rei will increasingly be back into the picture, trying to see, or Asuka trying to figure out how to deal with Rei versus how to deal with Shinji becomes kind of it's an interesting... How do I describe this? I don't think Asuka is used to being ignored, right? I don't think she is used to being treated as unimportant, even if it's a negative reaction and being pushed back. I think Asuka would prefer that because yeah, no actual chance we would go all the way through it without one of those, right? Um, yeah. Now, in Asuka's defense, Rei is quite the enigma anyway. But I think it's interesting that we get to see how a completely different approach from Shinji's it also gets stonewalled, right? Uh, Asuka's brand of trying to get through people's shield is no more effective than Shinji's attempt to deflect and do nothing of the sort. Um, but I think that first interaction really kind of sets up how the two of them are going to relate to each other for a while, actually. Certainly through the ones we've watched so far to today. Um, anyway, great little bit. Yeah, Asuka feels like a child star. Yeah, and it's interesting that I think that's why it's so interesting that she becomes the school idol. Doesn't care, not really. She seeks out Rei out of all the people who might adore her and wants to meet her. Yes, establish some kind of starting relationship, but just like with Shinji, she wants to loom over. She wants to stand over her. She doesn't think anything of interrupting Rei's reading by standing in her light. In fact, insists upon it so that Rei will pay attention to her. And so it's such a nice, the stomping on the letters is such a nice thing to help us understand Asuka's priorities. And Asuka doesn't have to say a word, right? Yeah, she's not in competition with her classmates. She doesn't care. Yeah, the competition, being the best Eva pilot, is where she derives her purpose, which is something she'll say much later in the episode, essentially. So yeah, I've talked so much about how characters are introduced to this series because I do think it's one of the things the series does exceptionally well, considering everything else that's going on. And Asuka, it's like they really perfected how that by the time they got this far in. Yeah, I mean, even her, the way she fights is attention-seeking. We'll see that here in a minute as well. And she will do things like refer to Rei as the prototype pilot, trying to put distance between them to make her lesser, right? And it doesn't, I mean, we don't have to dig very far to find examples of Asuka's where she's deriving her sense of self-worth from, but the fact that she has to attack the other pilots in just little ways like that really betrays some insecurity. Like, it really betrays that she is competitive, but maybe not from the sense of wanting to be challenged, only from the sense of wanting to be declared the victor, right? So, yeah, she's only stomping on the pictures or the love letters because she's seen the pictures. I don't know, but yeah, she always has to be on top. She always moves over. We'll get to it, but the same thing how happened later. Even when she's in distress, she doesn't forget that that's how she prefers to be. So anyway, I love the introduction sequence here. I love how quickly we get a sense. We get reminded about Rei and Rei's own proclivities. Asuka stays on point, stays on character, and just seeing that she also gets stonewalled. And you can tell Asuka's probably going to be searching for a way to deal with Rei for a while. Now, again, we've watched the next few, so we know that that's true, but even from this initial introduction, that should be clear. So, anyway, let's move on to a little more of Kaji, the other person we met last time, who will initially kind of throw us off, I think, by the way he comes up on Ritsuko, and not gonna play, huh? There we go. And this is such a nice like bait and switch, because since we don't know Misato is anywhere around, this looks like a very private moment, and you start thinking, wow, is Kaji just this philanderer? Is just this eternal playboy? Is this how he himself puts himself above others? And of course, it's nothing of the sort, right? He's really doing it to tweak Misato. But the fact that Ritsuko goes along with it, right? That she's not immediately pushing him away and not immediately hands off, tells us that they're actually very comfortable with each other. That they probably have a long history. That just as Kaji already knew Misato, probably knows other Nerve personnel, and this is like a reunion, actually, right? But of course, that he would choose to do it this way, as long as it gave him an opportunity to. Went too far. Oh no, I didn't. Sorry. As long as it gave him an opportunity to tweak Misato a little bit. Yeah, right there. But anyway, that's a little bit more, and they confirm for us that they are in fact old friends. And we find out that Kaji's going to be around for a while, which is delightful, I think, to us in the audience, because that means we get to see more of this tension between them. It's not just it's not just a thing that gives us humorous moments, right? And it gives us plenty of those, but it's also going to characterize Misato and Ritsuko more than we had gotten to this point. Introducing kind of a foil character, or a character who upsets the normal balance of things, will often peel back some layers of characters, right? It's one of the things that Asuka does, especially among the Eva pilots, and Kaji, in his own way, is coming in here and doing the same kind of upsetting the apple cart among the adults. The two of them having some similarities and having a similar relationship, meaning Kaji and Asuka, to Misato Shinji, now gets a further echo in the way Kaji is affecting that little trio versus the way Asuka affects her little trio. Yeah, you're not crazy. So, like, they will occasionally name them one thing for subtitles, and then since the characters will call them different things depending on their comfort level, I guess sometimes the subtitle translators want to keep that consistent for the people who aren't actually listening or just reading. I know that can be very confusing for people who are new to anime in general, understanding that a character might be called a variety of things depending on who's doing the naming. And so that might just be for clarity for people who don't want or care about that kind of nuance. So anyway. Yeah. So again, Kaji and Asuka both having a similar effect on their little groups, and they make these back-to-back scenes, right? They put it together so we understand that just as Asuka, last time, she's a transfer student. We know she's going to be away. Kaji's coming in here to upset things, and he's on standby. He'll be here for a minute as well. So it's setting up our expectations once again of how the character interplay between these two sets of trios will probably proceed. We got the ingredients for what's coming down the line. So, anyway, angels show up. Time for another battle. And both Shinji and Asuka go out. And so now, we once again see Asuka's where her priorities lie, right? She wants this to be her debut fight. Why might I be able to do this herself? Why can't I be the only one in the spotlight when I'm in my Evangelion? This is the attention she actually wants and craves. And now Shinji, at this point, is kind of used to how things go and doesn't care about it as much as Asuka. Not to say he doesn't care at all. We'll get to that. But I don't think he at this point realizes what this means for Asuka, right? And doesn't realize that she has priorities besides just winning the battle, just completing the mission, right? He's got his own set of priorities and hang-ups too, to be sure, but he at least is thinking of his role in the Evangelion, I think, at this point, is just to do what he needs to do. It's not the kind of thing he just wants to be in. He wouldn't pal around in his Evangelion if he didn't have to, I think. He feels, comfortable, oddly comfortable in the entry plug, like we talked about last time. That's got a very kind of womb-like feel to him. But the Evangelion itself is also associated in his mind with the pain. And so, to him, it's just put up with the pain, whatever it is, get the mission done. And I don't think it has occurred to him at this point that there would be any other reason. Something else I forgot to point out just during those school scenes. I mentioned it yesterday, but Asuka never takes off her little interface things. I'm not sure they've been named at this point. Are they ever named? I think they are, but anyway. That by itself tells us how much of her identity she derives from being the Eva pilot, because we can clearly see that Shinji and Rei go to school and don't wear them, so she's the obvious exception there. Now, yeah, they have a little bit of a horn-like look to them too, I agree. And if you that's up to talk about on stream. I mentioned that there's a red Oni, blue Oni personality pairing between Rei and Asuka, and their color schemes match basically. But the Oni have horns in the folklore, so there's a lot of there's a good chance that some of the Evangelion designs are meant to invoke that, meant to recall that Oni folklore. But blue Oni, red Oni pairings are like opposite personality pairings that have a hot, cold, fiery. This is actually, someone can probably find the TV tropes link. Red Oni, blue Oni, I think is actually what's even called. So yeah. This is like the primordial cat ears, right? Before that was just a thing we had all over anime. But in this case, they don't have a cutesy connotation. They not a sinister connotation, not for Asuka, not at this point. But it is it's a constant reminder of this is where she derives her identity and worth. And the other kids, at least, I don't think are perceptive enough to get this about her. And even this whole episode, which is about them figuring out how to not not fight like this at the very beginning, not do their own thing. I don't think Shinji only has really one revelation about Asuka from this episode, and we'll get to that. But cat ears were always a thing. Yeah, I just don't know how back throwing cat ears on everyone was a I don't know. I think Evangelion even predates the wide use of moe as a concept. So, yeah, no. We're talking about Darling again, but yeah, I think there's a really good chance that Zero Two has patterned something off of Asuka, considering how many other intentional parallels exist. So they even have the red Oni, blue Oni personality types and color schemes and all that. So, anyway, now Asuka here fusses at Shinji and kind of shut up, don't be logical in my moment of wanting to be vainglorious. And then she kind of makes this comment about why was someone like him chosen to be pilot. What do you think she means, like him? She'll later accuse him of being a weakling and not being a man and all that. But at this point, what she knows about Shinji, what is it you think? Is it just that he is so passive? Is it just that he doesn't compete with her in the way she wants? Was she simply expecting someone more like Kaji? So it's a passivity that he's quote unquote beta. Yeah, I wonder if it's just that he is more passive in contrast to her, or is it simply does she want the competition? I guess what I'm asking. Well, I'll actually skip to it. But she will say that the 2-on-1 fight feels like cheating. Okay, that she actually has a sense of honor in combat, and despite how much she wants to win and be the best and be the most praised, most famous of these Evangelion pilots, considering how she bristled at the idea of Shinji being famous last time. So that kind of implies that she would want some healthy competition, right? That she has almost a sense of ethics as far as combat. And she'll display this again next episode. But she wants to be seen as special, and Shinji doesn't. Oh, I see what you're saying. Because he doesn't prioritize being special as an Evangelion pilot, it diffuses the specialness of her as an Evangelion pilot. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. Yeah, Twitch Zero, I agree. She does seem to overreact to any notion of passivity from Shinji. Like, rather than accepting that as a victory or that being the way he is, it does seem to make her angry every time he is passive. We only have a small set of examples of that right now. She also worked very hard on being a great pilot. She doesn't like the idea of someone being naturally good. Yeah, I can see that, sure. That we will find out she has put in the work. And one of the things that happens in this episode, just like last time, is that Asuka proves once again that she's not all talk, that she is not all bravado, that she can both, talk the fight the fight. She can, she can walk the walk, right? And of course, during it, she doesn't care that she's stomping on buildings and more or less kind of making a mess of things. She just wants to win. just wants to show off. Does it in a very flashy way, maybe a very unnecessary way. She duplicates the jumping on from stone to stone. It was ships last time, it's buildings this time, right? And impressive Shinji. It was definitely an impressive display. There's no question that she hasn't earned some of the pride she feels in the way she pilots. And so you might be right. The fact that he doesn't take pride rubs her the wrong way. The fact that he is brand new to it and has been put alongside her might rub her the wrong way. At the same time, that she is dismissive of the others and wants to point out that their Evangelions are inferior, right? And that she was second child instead of the third child. Anything that she believes separates her from them. And yet, at the same time, I think you're probably right that she is also annoyed that it doesn't matter as much to them, maybe. Maybe that's what bothers her the most. And yeah, the fact that he is... Yes, the fact that in spite of his lack of work and lack of time in the cockpit, that he has perhaps superior sync rate or superior anything at all that might be comparable or superior to her is probably a further irritant, something else that just really gets under his skin. And so every time he is passive, or maybe she just can't believe when she says, why is someone like him pilot? Maybe she just can't believe that someone could have that kind of temperament and do this. And maybe just because from her own experience, perhaps. Kaji is obviously a very kind of aggressive person as well. Like, we've gotten some good examples of that. And so if her own example and him and Misato, she knew Misato, and Misato is aggressive in her own way. But maybe that's why she is so surprised, but also disappointed. Yeah. Yeah, it's not just sync right. You're right. He actually has, he can actually do tally marks on the side of his Evangelion for angels he's killed, right? So definitely going first here is a chance for her to add a tally of her own. And to be fair, they killed an angel last time, but Shinji was there. Shinji could potentially be considered a share in that credit. So, yeah. Yeah, I agree. I like that it's not a single thing, right? It probably is a multitude of little things. And, of course, the rushing in does not go as they wish. We once again, and we've had this multiple times now, we once again have a battle that begins and we don't see the conclusion of it. It just cuts right to the film room where they're watching the aftermath. And just from the first shot, we know, probably didn't go to plan. Probably didn't go to code. And we have the kind of almost comedic way of showing how the battle ended, having the two Evas literally straight down, feet sticking up out of similar holes, which is that's just downright cartoonish, right? I mean, this is an episode which is all about them working together, but the fact that they spark right now is not just characterization; it's a real sense of humor. I mean, it's a real source of humor, and I think using this as the defeated posture is letting us know that this is a little bit less, there's a little more low stakes. Not that killing the angel is ever low stakes, but this episode in particular is supposed to have this tone, this a little bit comical tone. I'm paying for that long session last night. I wish I could. I wish I can't fix the clip fetching for audio yet. I'm still working on that. But I wish you could. I wish you could hear the way she says, "How appalling." She'll do it again later, but it also reinforces that this is supposed to be comedic, because that's not a strategic assessment. We went to the trouble to clip that in, as though it's an official opinion on how the battle went. All this is to tell us that this episode is a little more lighthearted. This is a little bit of a break in some of the more serious things. They can tease a little bit of an out at the same time, but this lets us get used to Asuka in a entertaining way, for lack of a better word, in a fun way, in a way where her potential for comedy being inserted into the series can be put on full display. Yeah, and of course this is a very action-heavy episode as far as the amount of time they spent on the action, not the actual runtime of action. Even for the very first time, to going with like departures from the norm here, I think it's the very first time we've seen Fuyutsuki display emotion at all. Am I wrong on that? Yeah, and yes, we're still in the celluloid film standard in 2015 apparently. If this is really, I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've seen him do anything except just kind of smile and nod or agree whatever Gendo is doing or saying at the time. Now, I love the shot here because you have him looming up and with his authority, actually pulling his authority, and his shadow on the screen is way bigger than, the two of them argue, they stand up, their shadows cover their respective Evangelions, again, reinforcing that these two and their Evas are linked. We know that already, but there's so much way the shots are composed to reinforce that. But when he stands up and looms over them, his shadow is much larger. And it's just a trick of where they are in the projection room. But it's a very nice, again, it's one of those visual reinforcements of the actual relationship between the characters, right? The way they're on separate screens here, they're separate, their shadows are in different places, even the way the background has a little divider, right? But here we have the authority figure trying to put the brakes on their infighting, put the brakes on the things they're doing they find embarrassing because they're not becoming. He also clears them up. I have to back up to see it, I guess. Wondering he asked them what their purpose is and what is they're supposed to do, right? What is their goal? And I didn't mark this one, sorry, so I can't find it as easily. He asked them what their purpose is, right? What their job is what they translated. And Asuka is to pilot the Evas. It's to get in the machine, get in the robot, and be the center of attention and win the day and be the best. And he points it out. No, it's not. That is a means to an end, not the end itself. But for Asuka, being the Evangelion pilot, being the best, winning the day part, it's not the killing the angel she cares about, it's the winning the day part. And perhaps that is exactly where their problem is coming from, as far as being a team. Because if defeating the angels was what she thought her main priority she would be much more amenable to working with the other Evangelion pilots, right? Because that's the end goal. That's the actual victory condition. But instead, it's just being the Evangelion pilot. That's what she thinks her job is. That is what she thinks she is meant to do. And this is not the first. This is the first time of many times where authority figures are going to have to try to steer back towards purpose, steer them back toward what they're actually supposed to be doing. Anyway, actually, I thought it was a great shot. It's perfect the way the subtitle is aligned, too, since you could see all of it in that one shot. Now, speaking of people getting confused about their job versus what they're supposed to do versus what they want to do, when Ritsuko shows up with the little plan file or the discs or whatever it is, while this thing loses the ability to play. Alright, so slide experiment? Yeah. When she offers the plan, and she believes it's coming from Ritsuko, and she points out she's not the one who came up with this. This is actually Kaji's idea, right? And I think this is what someone was talking about earlier. They put Roji's on his name on the screen, and I'm pretty sure they both say Kaji. But this is what I wanted to point out. That distaste, it's him, but then that's the actual expression, the private face. That's the actual mask coming down. Distaste, but secretly pleased. Secretly kind of happy to be thought of this way, to have him bail her out. We pointed out last episode, but despite the way she had acted toward Kaji the whole time during the battle on the seas, when he shows up with a plane and she thinks there might be a moment of him swooping in to help, her whole countenance changes towards him, right? Her whole demeanor changes. And then, of course, he, lights out. But I think the idea that he might be coming to the rescue is still a very pleasant idea to her, right? And I think that right there says it all, right? This is the thing. And we have lost my notes. Hold on. And this is getting scratchy also. We'll reset it. Better? Yeah. And, yeah. All right. Notes. Eventually the notes will be over here and we'll be fine. Now, I'll talk about the interrupting the battle. I just want to say that we've had the battle interrupted several times, but it served a different purpose each time, right? It was not a... it wasn't for suspense. It didn't emphasize like the emotional fallout like the episode 2 when it splits up. Again, it's just used for humor. By cutting right to the ignoble defeat positions, the battle interruption is now used in a completely new way. So they keep using certain techniques. And I see people talking about the countdown clock later on. They continue to use some of the same storytelling structuring techniques to different effects. And so when something like that happens, when they bring a storytelling trick out, by the time we get into the second half of this, you don't know what use it's going to be put to, right? So walking us through all of these ways they might alter the way they tell the story is setting our expectations up a little bit, but also letting us know that it won't be as predictable as we might be led to believe otherwise. So let me get... oh yeah, I forgot in that same scene. Where are you? No, I didn't put a marker for this. Yeah, I really need you to work correctly, please. So after Fuyutsuki's little outburst, Asuka asks, why does everyone around here get angry so easily? Shimi says she is not particularly self-aware, but how she behaves. So I do not think at all she realizes that she comes off the same way, that she goes so quickly into anger. And so, I don't know if this is a lack of self-awareness, or does it mean that she simply isn't actually normally like this? Or is it just Shinji that sends her into anger so quickly? Anyway, let us get ahead to when they become roommates, when Asuka moves in. She has these series of objections about, like, complains about why did Japanese rooms so small? How come Japanese people have zero sense of caution the way the doors don't shut? And the fact she keeps, and she'll do it later too, about sleeping on the floor. She keeps bringing up these cultural differences. She keeps putting distance between her and everyone else, but between her and Shinji in particular. Shinji's saying these things out loud where Shinji can hear them. So I think she's even falling back on their little difference in ethnicity to separate them further. But Misato comes in with a nice bit of adult wisdom and a little bit of gentle chiding, because we try to be perceptive and considerate of others. Now, it's said all kind of pleasant and matter of fact, but you can't help but believe that this is being said directly to Asuka, right? Yeah, you're right. She's not wearing the interface things. So when she's actually at home, she's taking them out. Although she's come out just out of the shower. She's still wearing the towel from that. So I guess they're probably not waterproof. Or maybe when she's totally alone, like in the bath, and she expected to be alone here because she didn't know Shinji was actually going to be hanging around, that she takes them out. And so if no one's going to see her, or she believes no one's going to see her, maybe she doesn't care, right? Anyway, when they do actually find out that, no, this is not a roommate exchange, you are in fact both going to be roommates now, well, they are appalled. You can even see in the backdrop here where they put a dividing line in the wall there to further show how they're separated. But what I guess I want to point out is that Asuka's initial protest to this, her reason for this not being a good idea, is sexual in nature, basically. That boys and girls shouldn't sleep in the same room. Not an objection against Shinji himself, but rather the fact that he's a guy. Right? That's where the first place her mind goes, to come up with an objection. And this, I think, it's not the first instance, but it definitely helps remind us that unresolved sexual tension between these two is an ongoing thing. And it's not just, it always, at first especially, it seems to be just from Shinji's point of view, or Shinji's perspective. But I think this little bit from Asuka says to us that the thoughts crossed her mind too. That she, unlike Misato, who doesn't see Shinji that way, which is why she was an NREI as well, while neither of them were put out by Shinji's nudity. Asuka actually leaps right to that, right? So, anyway, I just wanted to point out that that's the first place she went when it came to objection. Now, this episode, of course, because of the sync attack and all that, is a great excuse to force the two of them to work through their issues. Not that it's successful. And of course, again, there's lots of humor. We've got the matching outfits again, and the the reaction of the classmates, and the class rep, I forget her name, I'm sorry, but she, of course, also leaps right to the idea that something indecent must be going on. And so again, that's the kind of thing that's foremost in adolescent minds. Now, despite this being all about making the two of them work together, obviously things do not go really well at first. And when they are experiencing failure, Misato will ask Asuka if she wants out. And Asuka reveals that she doesn't actually think she'll get out. Like, she's not actually looking for an out, right? She just wants to complain about Shinji. She just wants to denigrate him and be the one who is doing it right, who is superior. But when she's saying here, she's like, well, there's no one else, right? But when, of course, Misato suggests that Rei give it, which, by the way, how many, like, fantastic smug faces does this series give us? Rei, of course, is in an order. She immediately goes to it. And it has never occurred to Asuka that she could be replaced, that she could be replaceable. And seeing that is not something she can handle very well. She actually, for the first time, doesn't go immediately on attack. She doesn't know how to handle it and runs instead. And, you know, the class rep gives her, I won't go through it, but you made a girl cry, you've got to go after her. Well, Shinji didn't have anything to do with it, but I think the class rep is still in that mode of girls and boys living together and thinking it like they're in a relationship. Like, you made the girl cry, you got to go after her, you got to be a man. It's something else, I didn't mark it, but there's a point where when Shinji is going along with the plan to live together and do all this, and Asuka is objecting, and Shinji doesn't back her up, which she, I guess, wanted him to do. She once again, asks him, aren't you a man, or aren't you? She once again asks him, aren't you a man, or aren't you a boy? I think is what she actually says. Better? There we go. No, not better. Sorry, guys. How about now? Okay. And we talked about last time that putting him into the suit designed for her was kind of an emasculating thing, and it becomes a thing she actually reaches for several times. So I don't know if she... Are you a man or an audio issue? Definitely an audio issue. Down the line, I'll try to figure out what's going on there. Anyway, she runs off. Shinji is convinced to go after her. And she gives us a little bit of honesty that she knows she has to do it. She never thought she was going to get out of it anyway. More than that, though, piloting is all she's got. But that is what gives her not just purpose, but identity. And we have this nice little scene where Shinji is reflected in it, and there's kind of by overlaying the two of them like this I think says that they are in this moment of vulnerability more closely aligned. They're no longer separated like they've been in so many shots and so many background things. Here they're actually overlaid on top of each other. That this is a first key step to being not quite so contentious, not quite so distinct. But I think what I think is the reason for this, the reason this is working, is because this tactic of Misato's of suggesting Rei take her place. This is just like when Shinji didn't want to do the "Do you want to be the sniper?" Didn't want to do that that episode, and the suggestion that Rei would simply step in for him, or take his place. seems to be the thing that prompted him to go through it. That the idea of being replaceable is pretty unpalatable. That they're deriving too much meaning from these, from their status as pilots. And to be fair, like, I can imagine how the whole rest of your world experience feels tuned down in comparison. But it's a lot more than that. And the constant reinforcement of how much the pilots and their Avas are one and the same is should tell us that should reinforce that point for us. And so I think this is a great bit of visual storytelling, because Shinji was in the same position, suddenly realizing he was replaceable, and it was what prompted him to keep going as well. So anyway, I just want to stop on that. Now, after this little admission of hers, she admits that wounding her pride, that was like the thing. That was the thing that she's going to get back at them for. She's going to get back at Rei and Misato. She's taking it out on Rei. Rei had nothing to do with it, but, you know, when she's angry and in attack mode, anything looks like a target. But now that she's over her moment of crisis and vulnerability, she's returned to wanting to be up high, wanting to be stand over and loom over Shinji. So even she went from that moment of being crouched down, the two of them being overlaid, to going back to she's kind of got herself back together. She's back to being standing up on top. Now, the actual kind of key little bit of characterization, we're already running over. I apologize. The night that Misato's not there, the night that it is just Asuka and Shinji in the house, Asuka makes a big production of moving out to the next room and separating them because she's not being forced to be with Shinji. But then she will, and we have again the kind of the voyeuristic thing here. She says the doorway is the impenetrable wall of Jericho. So we're once again reaching for a little religious reference here. But the thing about the wall of Jericho is it fell. That's like the whole point of the story. And so is this Asuka being a bit of a little bit of a tease, or not tease, that's not the right word. Does she know what she's saying? That she's saying that, that this is more of a like, here's this barrier between us, this impenetrable wall. But the reference I'm going to reach for is a wall that comes down with a little bit of effort, right? The Jericho story is they march around the walls for 7 days, something like that. A lot of effort. But by doing that, the walls all come down. That was a certain amount of effort. Even these so-called impenetrable walls can come down. And we'll find out that Asuka is pretty smart, but is this a Freudian slip? Is this her intent to be like, these are walls, but you could work through them? Or is this simply the actual storytellers winking at us? They're giving us a heads up that this is the truth about Asuka. For certain, obviously, the storytellers know what they're doing. There's a lot of walls you could have reached for. To use that one in specific means something. But I think how aware Asuka is of what she's really saying makes an interesting kind of point to wonder about. Now, because of the routine of sleeping in the same room, she has it all the time. When she comes back from the restroom, she plops down in her old place. And we have talked about how we're seeing things from Shinji's point of view. which means occasionally we are voyeuristic because Shinji's being voyeuristic, which is why we have this kind of slow pan over the sleeping, vulnerable, not particularly, not covered up Asuka. This is again just going to put us in the same position as Shinji, and to see his reaction, obviously. And despite all of their infighting, okay, despite the conflict between them as people, despite all this infighting, despite how much they just immediately go to the throat, and you saw, I've skipped past it, but there's the whole there's the whole montage of them training where every failure, or so many failures, become a competition between them, or Asuka lashing out against Shinji. They can't agree which TV station to watch, even. And obviously there's a lot of surface distaste towards Asuka from Shinji. But when presented with an Asuka who is not awake, okay, when she is not being that personality, when she is beside him and vulnerable and is just like with her personality turned off, she is, in this moment, I think, to him, she is just like the sexual packaging of a person. She's not the Asuka that he's always running up against, right? And without that barrier, yeah, his attraction to her has nothing to stay its course, and which is why he reaches in for the kiss, which is, this is not good behavior, but it tells us a lot about Shinji, as far as, given the chance, he can see Asuka this way, right? But as he goes in for, there's a lot of tension to this, the way it's slowed down, and again, we're in his viewpoint, seeing his own face reflected in her eyes. But when she kind of calls for her mama and is crying in her sleep, she stops being that just physical person that he finds attractive. She goes back to being a person in truth. All right. And he can't go through with it, luckily. And hearing her kind of cry for her mother in the night gives him pretty important perspective, right? That I think what he says is that she's just as much a kid as he is. Yeah. And I think Shinji kind of learns a lot about himself from this little exchange, in addition to learning a lot about Asuka. And I just want to point out too, real quick, that this Asuka tosses in her sleep. So just like the thing that Kaji said about Misato, that she tosses in her sleep. Again, drawing that little parallel, reminding us of how Kaji, Misato, Shinji, Asuka have some echoes, some parallels. So anyway, they succeed. We have the awesome choreographed thing with the countdown timer. The timer is again something that we have had in the series already. Oh wait, I'm skipping past something. I'm sorry. I do want to talk about, since we had this echo, where Shinji is doing something not particularly consensual with a kiss and breaks off. At the same time, Kaji is very aggressively coming after Misato, right? And she doesn't push him away. And as he'll say, your lips didn't tell me to stop. And which again tells us more about Kaji. I think we have a pretty good sense that he's very aggressive. But how Misato feels about this is It's great how much he discomforts her, how much we get to see behind the Misato masks, because there are several of them. And when she's alone, she's angry. And, I mean, I think she is one part angry at Kaji, and one part, and maybe multiple parts, angry at herself. I think that is where the frustration here comes from. It's yeah. There's so many scenes that happen in elevators. It's or around elevators, and yes, they are talking about whether she is doing it on purpose or not. When Asuka came back from the yeah, so you're talking about whether Asuka came back and sat down beside him on purpose. I mean, I think they show us when she actually goes to the toilet, when we see a image of her face, that she is. I'll have that cued. So she looks really groggy. She looks really out of it, and I think she definitely. I think the whole setup there was, we know they've been doing this night after night, and so it is now plausible that she would simply, out of force of habit, go to where she has been sleeping. Because they started that the first night, right? She's never slept anywhere else. Despite moving all her stuff in different rooms, this is the only place in that house she slept. And so I can see her being out of it, going back to that, and the removal of Misato from that situation causes what happens, I'm pretty sure. But is she less aware and comfortable and not reminding herself to go to the other room because on some level she kind of wants Shinji to try that. She kind of this we talked about earlier, why is she mad at him being a pilot, someone like that, and I agree that his passivity is something that kind of annoys her. But what that also means is that he's not going to be an aggressive romantic pursuer like Kaji is. We see like having these two things happen pretty much simultaneously is very deliberate. And it may be that some part of her didn't care so much that she went back, like didn't concentrate enough to make sure she went back to the separate room, right? That there is some part of her that is not so put out by Shinji being a boy and her and a girl, and then having a little unresolved sexual tension. Like I said, that's the first thing she reached for when trying to object to the plan, that was in her mind, right? And it's yeah. She both wants him on some level and doesn't want him. And I think Misato and Kaji are going through the exact same thing, and that's what this whole scene's about. And so, since Kaji is aggressive, Misato has some anger towards him that works on her, that it's effective. And I think Asuka at the same time wants some of that attention from Shinji, and he's not aggressive, and that makes her angry for the opposite reason, right? So he's not just passive in his piloting and all that. It means he's going to be passive as someone who shows any kind of romantic interest. And now it's very plain to us, for sure, and to Asuka later, that there is that attraction. So, yeah. Whether she likes him at this point, probably not. I mean, she's pretty taken with Kaji. But I think that is more of an ideal rather than a realistic thing. And she says earlier in this she would much rather have lived with Kaji, and makes a kind of, wistful pose. And but I think getting romantic pursuit from a fellow Ava pilot, and we see already that Ava pilots are the only people she acknowledges, would feed her, right? That would give her another sense of something that gives her value. I think at least at this point, I think that's part of it. But again, just that feeling of being wanted is pleasant, even if you don't do anything with it, right? there's something to be said for feeling like you are desirable in and of yourself. And validation for that feeling often comes from other people. Yeah, Kaji's only, twice her age. Yeah, being half asleep is very much like being drunk, and the inhibitions are lowered. Your things you really want. There's a saying about being drunk that psychologists can debate this, but people say that when you're drunk, and being very tired is very similar to being drunk. You don't do things you don't want to do. You do things you normally wouldn't do. And so it may be this is Asuka acting in a way that she's not even aware she would want, right? So, yeah. Anyway, obviously self-worth is a huge thing in the series. It's obviously something that adolescents deal with a lot. Becoming self-aware and figuring out how big the world is and your place in it is disorienting for probably most everyone, at least for a period of time. But with the way the series keeps putting these scenes with the two different sets side by side is meant for us to understand that growing up by itself doesn't solve these issues, right? That this need for value in the way you sometimes get it from the outside, or can pursue it from the outside, or pursue getting it from the outside, and how frustrating that can be, and is something I think comes up a lot. But definitely where you get your value from is very clear with the pilots, how much pride they take in being a pilot, having attention from different people, whether that's Gendo, whether that's Misato, whether that's the greater Evangelion community, whether that's having the pretty girls you work with look your way, even if there's moments where you don't want that. That's definitely a recurring theme. So, yeah, we're still at episode 9. We've run over. I did a little bit introductory thing 10 minutes at the start, so that was part of the problem too. But we don't need to really go through this. You saw the great battle sequence, the fruit of their labors. And if I had more time, I probably will. I'm probably gonna cut one of these scenes to use as a new transition. But we once again have the countdown timer, right? That's another thing, another storytelling, tension-building thing, just like the split battles that we've seen a couple of times. The countdown for the battery is one of them. How quickly the Avos were drilling down is one of them. In this case, we have a new timer, and it serves a different purpose. It gives the entire thing this grand pageantry, right? Everything's set. We finally get to hear the first time the actual song they're trying to sync to. And it's this, I can't play it for you, but it's this full sound classical piece, and I think elevates almost the stature of the fight to something like art, right? And so you get to see all the sync things, and the timer in this case creates this entire sequence as a standalone set piece, that it's like a thing unto itself. Yeah, they succeed. It appears all their efforts to meet each other have had some payoff, right? We had the reflection thing I talked about earlier, and that empathetic connection where he went through something similar. And then, of course, seeing that she's just a kid like him, right? They should be closing that gap. Him realizing that she really is an attractive girl he's, a foot away from. But by the end, when the battle's over, when their purpose is spent, instead, they immediately go into infighting once again. And because they are so emotional in this moment, they air it all out. They tried to kiss me while I'm sleeping. See, hang on, I should make it bigger because I have too many things down here. Whoops, not that one. Ignore the banner, I hit the wrong thing. Just look at the variety of reactions in this room. And it's just the difference between who's amused and who's horrified, and Riska just putting up her hands in defeat. Yeah, I love that. Even though it's humor, we got this little moment to give us just a tiny little characterization of all these guys and how they would find, like, how amusing or not they find Asuka and Shinji's shenanigans. So just like the episode 7, yeah, episode 7, where we have the 3 breakfast scenes that I said were the structure that episode was built around, and the fact that the first and last one is the return to normalcy. This little infighting at the end tells us that progress was made, but this is really the true state of things. The two of them are not actually suddenly perfect companions, suddenly perfect teammates. And what I want to point out is that Shinji is getting angry back. The Shinji is pushing back and doing things. We talked about last time how the introduction of Asuka, and he suddenly takes the reins, that he actually gets in there and grabs her actual controls. And now we have him fighting back, pushing back, not being passive, right? The thing that she's probably upset him about. All in front of everybody. And he's airing all this stuff out. And Asuka brings this side out of him, and no one else does, not to this point. This is not him running away. This is him pushing right back. And so this is a great episode just to show how the two of them have potential, but how much more they're going to default to this infighting, but also the way that Asuka is being affected by Shinji, and Shinji's being affected by Asuka, right? It's a little bit of progress. It's a slow bit of progress, but it's hard. Even though they go back to this at the end, all that still happened. They still remember all that. So yeah, here you got this little self-contained episode that has the threat met and addressed and taken care of inside the same runtime, or the single runtime. And we moved all of our characters, just about. Not really Rey. Well, she's on doing the same thing she always does. By the end. So anyway, yeah. I think Asuka does have a positive effect. I think she brings this life out of him that he hasn't otherwise had. And yeah, I think perhaps him having seen her vulnerability, both in the convenience store and in the night where she's crying, she's no longer so alien or inscrutable. She's a kid just like him. And so that probably does, yeah, I agree, it probably does embolden him to push back. Well, but just the fact that he's able to be this way, that he's able to stand up like this. I mean, they fought and shouted at each other a little bit in the film room earlier, but I do think that emboldens him going forward. Yeah, and the way the hologram actually interacts to hit them, and she's popping out here. Again, this episode is a lot about humor. There's a lot of intentionally breaking physics and breaking the way things probably would work to let us know that it's okay to enjoy this as a lighthearted bit, um, to laugh. That this is a moment where the world's actually probably not going to end at any moment in this episode. Yeah, he definitely starts to come alive once Asuka is on the scene. So, yeah. Any other thoughts about this? A lot of favorite episodes. A lot of people love this episode. Um, it's a. We now have a lot of the elements together, right? And it's the first time we have an episode where we know who Asuka is, and we can just see how she interacts, like how she mixes in this little melting pot of, or pressure cooker, I should say, of personalities and conflicts and worlds ending, but also like you try to kiss me in my sleep. So we again have that contrast. Yeah, it is. It's a change of pace. It's a fun episode. I think they exactly. I think they intentionally let us know that it was okay to feel that way about this episode. A lot of the design decisions about what they put on screen, the way just the way some of the shots are composed, but without it being, this isn't filler, right? Like there's really critical character moments intermixed into this. Some of it are really like our very first understanding of some of these guys, but it's still at the end we come back to this humorous fighting and him admitting all this and her her overreacting and again the hologram is actually able to interact with him in real life. But of course, the Avas, which are all entangled with each other now, very undignified, and of course the nerve personnel are again embarrassed for a different reason. But that entanglement that you see there, I think, is also important. That's also the thing we gained from this episode. It's not exactly like perfect sync and holding hands or embracing or anything else, but it's definitely like an entanglement now, right? So. Yeah. Any other thoughts about this episode? We've run way over. I still want to take the break to change a couple things. I won't have the clip fetching for the other two episodes today. I just want to try that out first. It mostly works. A couple things to tweak, but I'll definitely start using that starting tomorrow. All right. Yeah, more entwined. But whether they want to or not, they are basically entwined. But I think we get the sense that they actually are okay with it. Like some part of them, whether they like to admit this or not, is warm to what's happening. They're amenable to the situation they found themselves in, even if there are day-to-day conflicts and day-to-day little things that don't go their way. They're figuring out a way to make it work. That might be the best way to put it. So, are we doing all spoilers? Yes, we are today. We're not going to let it go like tomorrow, where I did it for 3 hours. I don't know how long that went. It went really long. Won't do that today. But yes, we will. I have run over about half an hour. We're going to take a 3-minute break. We'll come back to episode 10. I keep saying 3 minutes. I'm not sure it's ever actually been 3 minutes. But in theory, we have a hypothetical 3-minute break. And so everyone can go get drink, restroom. I will as well. I'll change the scenes around. All right. I'll see you guys in a minute. I don't know why that. Alright then, let's get back to it. That definitely wasn't 3 minutes. I apologize. A lot of mods messaged me about something. Um, Thank you. Yes, I see some of your conversation there. Yeah, I think Misato's alcohol consumption is partially to characterize her, um, but it's also meant as a way for us to pick up on how stressful her job is. She plays it cool a lot, but it's obviously taking a toll. Um, I think it's intentional to have it come up so much. It's both funny and characterizes her, but also belies the um, cheery, confident exterior that she has. Right. So, on to episode 10. Uh, we get to see. I'll show you actually. I do not have the clip fetching set up for this time. I hope that was better. I feel like I definitely was able to find things much quicker. And so I probably will tweak it slightly. That'll be what we do starting tomorrow with all the episodes. But we see Asuka gets to go on a shopping trip with her beloved Kaji. And so we once again have it reinforced how she has this adoration towards him, that he is probably the figure that represents the masculine that she wants, that she pursues, that she is hoping for, that she idolizes, whatever you want to read into that. And what I think the important part of the scene is the way she is using him as a bit of a barometer for testing her femininity, right? Like she intentionally, when she grabs the swimsuit and he kind of is like, it's a little much for 14-year-old you, just like, you're an adult watching the series at times, you're like, that's a little much for a 14-year-old girl for me to be voyeuristically watching. But the thing is, she, I think, is perfectly aware of this. I think this reaction is what she was hoping to see. I think she wanted to know that was the impression, right? Yeah, I mean, it's very... At this point, we don't know anything about Asuka's family, but this kind of adoration of male figure and the testing of femininity on him is maybe the first suggestion that she is absent a father figure. That he it fills that role in some way, regardless of what her actual family situation is. It's just one of those things about figuring yourself out as a teenager. But again, I think the finding something that was provocative was important to her. That she wanted that. Again, that her femininity, she's hyper aware of that, and her sexuality, and it is kind of a little bit of a weapon for her. It's a little bit of things that she takes pride in, but only for the reaction from certain people. As we saw earlier, she doesn't care about the way all of her schoolboys care. So the fact she's going on the school trip, and that's an excuse to dress in something like this, that she can wear something like this and not be, chastised for doing it gratuitously, is a golden opportunity. Now, it seems like such a small thing to bring Kaji along for that purpose, but it again reinforces that she is comfortable with him in a way that she is not with the others, that he is her Misato, like to Shinji. But it gives this nice extra bit of meaning because she talks about it's for the school trip, we're going on a school trip, she's excited about scuba diving, and then she asks about his school trip, right? And it seems like an innocuous kind of conversation up to this point. But the thing that he answers to that is that they didn't have one. And it's because that times out to him to have been just after the second impact. The second impact made something as the second impact made something as trivial as a school trip get pushed aside. It just wasn't important enough. It just wasn't important enough in the wake of everything else going on. And so, that's kind of a sad bit of reality, even Kai's wistful look, because by cutting away immediately after the title tells us that's kind of that meant to be poignant. But the reason it is the reason I think that it is important is not just so they can. Well, it'll come later, basically. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But this is more than just showing how different things were for the people before Second Impact, for those born before Second Impact, unlike Asuka and Shinji and Rei, on the whole generation that's grown up with it. Like the classroom scene from a few episodes ago, where the professor is holding forth about what must be the most fascinating and important and written about event in all of human history, and the kids are all just kind of bored and are more interested in the transfer student and maybe the fact that he's the giant robot pilot. And this is just, again, his little bit emphasizes to us that the world those kids live in is a new world, right? That, and all the people who are over them, in charge of them, take care of them, who live through that, see the world in a different way. So it serves that purpose at the very least. But it'll actually come up again in a pretty important way. Now, I won't be able to clip hunt for you, so I'll just talk about it. But when Shinji and Asuka and all that find out that they aren't going on the school trip because they have to be on standby because they're Eva pilots, isn't that this comes with the job, Asuka? I'm sorry, and they're upset about it. And obviously, Misato and Ritsuko are talking about that. Ritsuko talks about how it's a trivial or a frivolous thing, I think is how they might translate it. That in times like these, that when the angels are back, that shouldn't be a priority. And what Misato answers to that, I'll just see if I can find it. Probably can't. But Misato says, oh, look at that, I did find it. They want to have fun while they can for precisely that reason, right? That while Risco might think it's a frivolous distraction, Misato actually sees the value in it. Misato actually understands the kids a lot better, well, better than probably anybody at this point. The reason I think it's significant thematically to a pattern we have going on is that it, again, is that low stakes, high stakes thing. That, yes, the high stakes here is you can't go on the school trip because, well, we kind of need you to safeguard all of humanity. Priorities. The kids don't see it that way. To them, not being able to go on the school trip, or at least especially to Asuka, is a crisis on par with an angel showing up, right? And in this particular instance, I think Misato understands the truth of it. That basically, being able to do something like that, being able to go on a school trip, that's the world that Misato is hoping for, right? The thing that Kaji didn't have, presumably she didn't have. The world they didn't get. So this is, I think this is like Misato as the surrogate parent figure here, hoping for a better life for their child. So this trivial thing is actually not, in the sense of if you wanted to build a better world, if you want a world where the kids can take a trip. That like it's a normal thing. Be normal school kids, the things they didn't have. Then in that sense, what it represents actually becomes high stakes. That actually becomes important. Um, and the fact that Misato is the one who sees this and cares about it, um, while Ritsuko does not, is another hint that for all of them being old friends and compadres, and very comfortable with each other, as we've seen, they have a different viewpoint. They have a different way of looking at the world. They know different things. We saw that Ritsuko is in on some of the secret plans where Misato is not. And it makes you wonder if both of them have the same idea about the world they want to build. That the purpose of NERV, what they believe is their end goal here, right? So the school trip, while it seems like such a frivolous little thing, as she even says, I think it's actually a great example of what kind of world some of these people are hoping to build, what normalcy looks like to some people, and the fact that that's what they want, that they want to restore the world to that. Like when Shinji's classmates referred to the Evangelions as something that would bring peace on Earth, right? That you have a set of characters who that's what they envision, that's what they believe all this is for. And so something like a school trip becomes important. And so giving the kids the opportunity to basically have their own kind of self-contained school trip at this pool or wherever this is happening, is actually important. Suddenly, it's suddenly not low stakes. I talked about her being surrogate parent, but that's how she's kind of acting. And there is actually a earlier example than that in the episode when she is chastising them for their schoolwork, right? I just want to point this out since we talked about it last time. This is that conversation. Be able to focus on your studies and knowing all that. Somebody pointed out that Asuka was not wearing her little interface things at home when she thought she was alone, but now when she's obviously at home, obviously in her casual hot pants, they're in. She's around Shinji. She's not alone, and she's wearing them again, right? Anyway, this is actually I misspoke it. This is the actual way where I think she what is it? Asuka doesn't care about grades. We'll later find out since she's actually completed school. And she has her own kind of philosophical thing about it. And that it again becomes the divide Japanese culture, German culture, that she keeps pushing back against, that she keeps invoking because it makes her different and separate, maybe. But another great face. But the fact that Misato is invested in their schoolwork, which again should be low stakes compared to saving the world, again to me says A, surrogate parent role, chastising the kids for their studies, and B, thinking about a world in which them having completed their schooling will become important, where that will actually matter to them, that they won't have to be Eva pilots, that won't be the sum total of their experience. See the scratch out. And Asuka at this point doesn't care about that. I mean, I imagine the notion of a world where she's not this special Evangelion pilot is probably somewhat horrifying, even if it would mean there were no angels and no threat to humanity. But Misato has kind of her eye on the prize here, right? She is actually thinking about the future and insisting that they think about that as well. So, anyway, this again, it seems like it's such a small thing against the backdrop of angels attacking. But if you think of it from the perspective of that all these little things symbolize the kind of world she's hoping to build, that the whole point of fighting the angels is to make a world where these things matter, where these things are possible, then it actually is a goal on par with defeating the angels, right? So, let's see. Now, Asuka, of course, was not going to let the swimsuit go to waste. And she will make an excuse to come over to Shinji and make sure there's no way he can miss what she's up to, right? And we, of course, can see from his point of view that, yes, she is getting the intended result. He does not fail to notice. And then here's where she'll admit that she's actually already been through college and finished that. And I think the fact that she's doing this now, that she wants this attention from Shinji, that he is probably the one she had in mind when she went shopping with Kaji. Yeah, it was nice to test out her femininity on Kaji as well, but this was kind of the end goal, I believe. So, and I don't think if it wasn't clear at this point. Sorry, let me pause. Here's where they introduce thermal expansion. But the real point of this is not to help him. It's to, by the way, have you noticed my boobs? Have you seen? I mean, it was like, it was such an awkward segue. Oh, thermal expansion, huh? By the way, have you noticed? And there's no subtlety here, okay? You know, for all where Asuka seems a little bit better adjusted when she's introduced compared to Shinji when he's introduced, this is some, like, embarrassment level seduction techniques, right? And she's just not getting the reaction she wants, right? And that's pretty plain when he deflects, when he doesn't say anything, when he's saying, she finds him boring. Like, this isn't what she wants at all. Yeah, I don't think she wants to be her and Shinji, but she definitely wants him to react in a different way than he's doing. She doesn't want this passivity from him. In so much as her femininity and her sexuality has become part of her identity in the same way as wearing the interface has, she wants recognition for that also. You know, I think even if she doesn't do anything with it, she wants that recognition. This is her own insecurity speaking probably as well. And yeah, she wants Shinji to be the one that reacts, like you're saying. The guys at school, all that attention, all that voyeurism, all that inappropriate pictures, I kind of forgotten that it happened when I watched this. I'm like, wow, no one said a word about that. That was just treated like a normal thing. It's Shinji she's getting that reaction from. Which, in fact, she's going on a school trip. It didn't matter that she was going where all the other guys were. It's the fact that Shinji was going also. So when Shinji's still here, I'm sure she wanted to go, and it would be fun to go to Okinawa and all that. I believe that, too. But she's not going to let the swimsuit go to waste, and this is the person she actually wanted to react. As a fellow Ava pilot, his opinion means a little more to her. So, anyway, yeah, I mentioned it just comes up to her, but she's already been through college, so I guess they just want her to adapt to life by sending her to school, so she doesn't actually need the education. But it's another marker of Asuka being really driven, right? And a smart girl, and that all her bravado, again, doesn't come from nowhere, that she is, in fact, highly competent. Her emotional maturity and personality has not caught up to this yet, which most people develop at different rates. But I think it's absolutely affected her personality, right? and I think it's galling to her that Shinji can be on a level with her. And so I feel like getting the attraction reaction from him, uh, I feel like that makes her feel like it evens the score a little bit, right? Uh, that that becomes a way she is winning over him, whether or not she is winning as the Ava pilot, right? It's definitely like a power dynamic. There's definitely, um, I think it was Oscar Wilde who says that everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power. Um, I think in some relationships or some dynamics, there's some truth to that. That if she can get this reaction, and she knows she's befuddling, I'm pretty sure, but if she can get that positive reaction from Shinji, that actually gives her some power over him. That is a way in which she is surpassing him or putting herself above. Um, anyway. Now, as though you know, you think thermal expansion would do me some good, but in a minute here, she'll also, I probably won't can find it, but when she's about to, she puts her scuba gear on, um, she's about to dive in, she calls out to Shinji to see her, to watch. Um, and let's see if I can find it. Well, it's not important. Basically, she wants his attention. She tries to get him to. Oh yeah, I found it. He's looking at Ray, who's come out of the water, which is a different matter. The fact that also Ray is here, don't forget. But she actually calls his attention back to her and wants him to watch her, enter into the, do her little scuba diving back roll entry. And so much, this reminded me so much of like a kid on like a playground. Who's like, hey, mama, watch this. Watch me do this. Pay attention to them. If she's not going, she wants his attention, right? And even in kind of a silly way. She'll do something very similar when she enters the magma here in a minute, where she tries to strike a pose before she goes in, and she calls out to Shinji in particular to watch her, to see what she's doing, right? Now, in this particular instance, though, yeah, it might be that she doesn't want him looking at Ray necessarily. Now, when I get onto the actual mission, I'll try to find it, but little success so far. They discover, I'm not going to recap hard for you, but they discover an angel that is in an embryonic state. All right. And what this reveals as they are talking about, where he's talking with the little council there, is that it tells us that it is not Misato and Shinji and the ground level people who don't know where the angels come from. Gendo and this council, at least when talking to each other, also don't know. Okay, that this is a mystery to them as well. And so now we know it's not just a division of separation of knowledge or, need to know basis situation. No one knows, or at least no one in this council will admit to each other that they know. And, but during that, talk about how there is a risk of initiating third impact. That tells us that in something about this embryonic state or something about interacting with this living angel specimen has that potential, which it colors in a little bit what we expect to learn about the second impact and what happened there. But it basically adds an extra level of risk to this mission. This is more than just diving into a volcano. This is more than just any angel interaction. This has much higher stakes. But there is some value in capturing the angel, right? Ritsuko here will point it out to us that the top priority is to capture it. Okay. It would be very easy to kill the thing in this embryonic state. It would be very easy to put it down if the whole purpose was to eradicate them. But by going through all this trouble to capture it, it tells us that there is something beyond the defeat of the angels, that there is some as yet unknown goal that having a living and in control angel would help achieve. It would be easier to achieve with an angel. So no one sits here and explains to us why, but the fact they go to this trouble is pretty. It's a world-building bit of significance, right? Now, so I want to talk about this scene real quick. Well, we know why Asuka was going to jump at the chance to. Yes, let me be the one who goes in there. Let me be the one who does the mission. I'm sure there will be very few missions where she wouldn't normally be like, yes, let me be the one. Let me be the guy who wins the day. And but what happens when she does this is Shinji thinks to himself, it'll probably be me anyway, in spite of her enthusiasm. And it seems like they make me do this again. I'm so tired of being Ava Pilot. But when they actually name Asuka instead, I think he's disappointed. I think he may have been fatalistic about the fact that what he believed was the fact that he was going to be chosen. But that's not relief, that expression. I think he a little bit, seeing her chosen when he has just assumed it would be him, kind of betrays that maybe he wanted it to be him. Maybe he wanted it to be... this was an unexpected outcome. And I'm not sure he's pleased with the result, right? Now the other thing that happens in this scene, I think it's the scene. No, it's not this scene. I've lost it. We do have kind of the hilarity with the thermal suit, right? Where it goes from being this form-fitting and feminine thing to not particularly flattering. And both this and the suit, both this and the suit that they put on her, Ava, horrify her, right? This is definitely, she again, the purpose is not to defeat the angels or carry out the mission. To her, it's her being in her Ava, her being the pilot. And she has a certain idea in her head of what that should consist of, what that should look like. And this is not it. That ain't it, Chief. And she almost bails on the thing. Really, like that's her first instinct, is to, despite volunteering herself, and she even admits that she doesn't have the guts to let Kaji see her this way. And they admit that, like, oh, this is a problem. This is a problem. This is more than just her having the fits. But when Rei volunteers, oh, let's just pause on that face for a second. Yeah, no way. Rei is no longer just like this person she can't figure out, this enigma, this person she simply wants to be better in. This is the person that already embarrassed her once by going and showing her up in the little, I don't know what you would call it, the Twister routine, the Dance Dance Revolution precursor or something. That that stung Asuka a lot, and this is her volunteering again is way too much. And then she's like, Asuka's brutally honest about it. If it means stopping the first child from going, then I'll go. Not if it means saving humanity, not if it means completing the mission, not if it means doing my job. If it means stopping Rei from going, I'll do it. So, as little as they have interacted, their relationship has gone from one of interest to indifference to pretty much outright hostility, right? Now again, this is just like how the notion of being replaced, of not being the one chosen, of having, especially now, Rei go in her place, is more untenable to Asuka than the way she looks. But again, it's important to know that the way she looks is that important to her. That her physical presentation is part of her identity as much as piloting the Eva. And she's just as upset as the fact that her Evangelion is in this giant, thermal fat suit. Which again tells us that she thinks of her Eva as an extension of herself, that the connections between them are more than just what's necessary to pilot, that there is some association of identity and ego between the two. That she would be embarrassed secondhand for her war machine says that that's not all it is, right? That it is both an extension of herself physically and the view she has of herself, the view that she hopes other people have of her, right? Anyway. Sorry, let's skip ahead. Since I ran over in episode 9, which is a great one to talk about anyway. Kaji will also throw in something there that when she protests, like, I was hoping to see you in action, right? Trying to leverage the fact that he knows Asuka would like to show off in front of him. But of course, he actually dips out before the mission. Well, he's actually not going to be around. This is, again, a way of trying to manipulate the kids to do what they want, rather than treating them as autonomous equals. But they have their eyes on the prize. Whatever the mission is, it's like that child soldiers thing we talked about in the conflict. The moral conflict that invokes is you're asking for a cost to people who are not in a position to understand the cost they're consenting to or signing up for. So, I don't know. The fact that Kaji wants her to show off seems tame until you realize he was not going to be there in the first place. That it's purely manipulative to get her to go into the, searing hot magma. That tells us more about Kaji. It tells us a little more that Kaji is more like Ritsuko perhaps than like Misato. Anyway. Let's see. I'm gonna try to push further here. We do have a bit where Misato, they dipped the probe looking for this thing in the volcano earlier, and Misato pushed it well beyond its operational limit, and it was destroyed. She will do something similar when it comes to lowering Asuka into the magma. They eventually reach operational depth and can't find it. It's moved, and she insists on going further, on pressing on. And Misato's like, gotta keep going, right? And it appears to be a repeat of the thing with the probe. They already set us up to know that Misato would push it this far, but that was just a probe. now she appears, at least, to be heading this way with one of her pilots on board. Now, while we assume that this actually sets up the hot spring things, but we assume she still has her pilot's best interests in mind, right? That she would not actually put Asuka in harm's way. But I can't help but wonder, and you tell me, I can't help wonder, would she act exactly the same way if it was Shinji? Because earlier in the series, you know, she seemed a lot more hesitant to put him in harm's way. I'm not sure. I mean, you tell me. That's definitely a thing that I wondered about when I was watching, is would she act exactly the same if it was Shinji? Anyway, now, despite the consternation of the other people there in the control room, Asuka is not distressed by this at all. Asuka agrees with Misato. I mean, Asuka, again, I know I brought it up before, but Asuka pretty well handles the actual combat of things pretty well. There's other places where she falls short. Yeah, here it is. Where Misato insists they keep going, I'm in command. And Asuka, they're of an open channel here. Misato's right, I'm still good to go. The fact that Misato even said that over the open channel where Asuka can hear it tells you that she's not pulling her punches on this, right? This isn't something she's trying to... I guess she's aware of it, and she wants even Asuka to be aware of it, maybe? But I don't know. I don't know if she would do this the same way if it was Shinji. And yeah, so that's a good point. That pointing out, hey, we'll just go to a hot spring after this definitely seems like a reassurance, like a fake promise or a thing that you're just saying in the moment to try to get them to continue to hold it together. And Asuka, of course, is so prideful that if Misato insisting that they go on, that they can continue the mission, there's no way that Asuka would gainsay her, right? That would be a it would be a loss of face to agree with the worry, to be like, you know, you're right, I actually don't feel very comfortable with this. Can we bail on this whole thing? Asuka in this situation isn't likely to raise a protest, especially with Misato insisting they go further. And so I wonder now, since Asuka was chosen for this, if that was part of the reason. That Shinji might be like, yeah, you know, these guys are right. Maybe you should, like, not keep lowering me into the volcano. Whereas Asuka wants to be the one to succeed so much that she might be willing to take more risks. I don't know. Because if it's true that she would be different if it was Shinji in there, that tells us something about Misato and how she feels about Asuka versus how she feels about Shinji, and how her humanity in a very general sense. And it might be simply that Asuka, because of her bravado, is more likely to keep it together. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's like professionalism from Asuka. Asuka also takes a lot of pride in how she comports herself when she is the Evangelion pilot, in a way that Shinji doesn't care about. So it may be that in kind of a military command structure like this, Asuka is the actual professional, and Asuka the more predictable entity. And it might be that's what went into the decision. It has nothing to do how she feels about Shinji versus Asuka at all. So I found myself wondering, though, would she do this the same way if it was Shinji? And it might have nothing to do with about how she feels about them, or whether she values one of their lives over the other. Um, because even wondering that is kind of me disparaging Misato a little bit, which is not my intent, because she's like the one person who cares about the kids' well-being in this world. Maybe it's simply strategic. Maybe it is. Maybe pushing her. Maybe this is less like Kaji's manipulation and more like just a good commanding officer decision. Because as we point out, for all Misato's occasional immaturity and functional alcoholism and own kind of hang-ups with her own femininity, sexuality, and now the history with Kaji, when it comes to game time, she gets her game on, right? She's highly competent in stressful situations. It's a... We don't have to be told she's good at her job. We get to see her do it all the time, right? So maybe it is. Maybe it's just one more example of her making the correct choice for the situation. But, yeah. Yeah, Asuka should be right at home in a red-hot volcano. Anyway. We don't have to run through the bit. I know I kind of skip over the fights a lot because they're entertaining, but like things happen, then this happens, then this happens. I don't need to narrate the conversation, the episode for you. It's usually just there's something in it I want to point out. And in this case, it is more that again, I do want to point out that how well Asuka keeps cool under fire this whole time, and she herself comes up with the the thermal expansion solution. This is the whole like plant and payoff thing where they so a lot of you are going to know this already because it's a pretty famous storytelling technique. There's something called Chekhov's gun, which is if you introduce an element seemingly seems out of place, then it needs to come back into the story. Otherwise, you wasted our time. And in this case, the whole conversation about thermal expansion could have been that Chekhov's gun that we're expecting. They talked about this scientific concept. I wonder if that's going to come back into play. But what they do is they immediately have Asuka turn around and try to wonder if that has, this helped my figure a bit. And so the fact that it's going to come back into the episode gets covered up by apparently giving us the payoff right then and there. That it gives her the chance to draw attention to herself and make a kind of lame joke. And so potentially we forget that there might be a later payoff for introducing us to that thermal expansion via joke. So that is an example of what TV Tropes calls Chekhov's boomerang, which is when you think the Chekhov's gun is fired. You think it was a one-shot deal, but it's a boomerang. It actually comes back into the story. In this case, it comes in again for humor when they make the joke in the hot springs. But that is a way that humor can be used to mask things that would otherwise tip you off as to where the plot was going. Not that it's 100% successful all the time, but this is an example of using that technique. So there you go. Chekhov's boomerang. Thank you. So yeah. Sorry, I'm not reading chat as much today because we're running behind, but I've got good thoughts. Last thing I wanted to say... No. 3 more things I want to say. When Asuka, her cables are severed, and she's sinking in... I'll give the clips here. And she is sinking down. She has this expression on her face of... Oh, I went too far, I'm sorry. Darn. Yeah. Is this the end of the line? It's not a very... rage against the dying of the light kind of reaction, is it? I mean, it's a, man, this sucks. Am I gonna die? There isn't a, there's definitely like a sense of despair, and I'm sure it's shock as well. But it's kind of a tame reaction from someone we expect to overreact, right? I mean, she reacts pretty dramatically to a lot of things. She was definitely, yeah, like you're saying, I think she was ready. It's kind of a sad thing. Like it's almost as though we talked about how she doesn't seem to care about the studies, and because piloting Ava is all she has, and that probably a world in which she's not a pilot is horrible to her, horrible to imagine. And maybe that means that she's always expected that she would simply die doing this one day. That she's actually already rather. And I think how prepared she was for that, and how much she doesn't rage against it is, I think, pretty telling. I think this is another nice, very subtle look inside what makes her tick, because we don't know much about her like history at this point. All we know is the face she's put forward, so we have no reason to suspect, or no reason to extrapolate much about what she believes in a broader sense, how much she values herself, or what she thinks her future is, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So when Shinji actually saves her here, when he puts himself in harm's way, one, there's this image where he seems, this is like intentionally kind of demonic and aggressive, isn't it? I don't know exactly how to parse that. I'll be very curious in y'all's thoughts. Look at the way her face softens. I mean, what a change. Look at that. And of course, I mean, she can't just say thank you, of course. She has to throw a little shade at him anyway, because that's just the kind of relationship they have. But, I keep talking about the parallels here. It's something someone asked me yesterday in the all series spoiler thing, to talk about what we know about Kaji Misato versus Asuka Shinji. It's a great question, and I'm not prepared to answer it, and I didn't then because I can't remember how many little things like this there are until I work my way back through it. But remember how Misato has reacted when the first time she thought Kaji was coming to save her, or going to save the day on the airplane, and then when he actually kind of saves her by having the sync plan, how she reacted. That reminds me so much about how Asuka reacts with Shinji saving her in this case. It might even be the same expression. I should have bookmarked that to show you, but I don't know. Despite how accepting of death Asuka seemed to be in that moment, when she is granted a reprieve by Shinji, that's as soft and kind of affectionate a look as we've seen her give him, right? Yeah, and we don't know if Shinji was doing that of his own accord or not, if he was ordered into that or not. I could see the higher-ups not wanting him to stick his Evangelion in the magma when he is not equipped for it, right? But they don't spell it out for us. They actually leave it mysterious as to whether he did this of his own volition or not. And whether he jumped in or not is it tells us something about his character. We just don't know what it is now. Either way, we've had the open channel the whole time, so presumably we would have heard them say that and heard them arguing about it. So I think it's probably based on the information we have, it's probably a better assumption that Shinji did this of his own accord. At the very least, since we were in Asuka's point of view in the cockpit and we didn't hear any kind of orders to do that or no, don't do that, from her point of view, he did it of his own accord, right? And as far as how that moment matters and how it changes her character, that's the interpretation that matters, because that's what Asuka believes happened. At least that's my take on that. Y'all can agree or disagree. Yeah, that's what he likes to do. He likes to save the person in front of him. And the thing is, like we talked about, saving the person in front of you is something much more concrete and accessible than saving the world. A very abstract notion, a very hard thing to wrap your mind around. And that can be paralyzing. That's too much. But saving just one person, just the one person in front of you, that's reachable, right? And that's what a lot of that's a story thing in general. That's like the heroic pattern. Is you make the world a better place, one person at a time, right? And then heroes will build up to the point where they are literally saving the world. But the two echo each other, right? You start there. You start small because it's actually part of the whole same journey. Yes, no, I agree. The idea that they wouldn't have communicated during all of that is weird. The descent is slow when she's being lowered from the crane, but maybe if he swan dived in, it was a faster descent. Again, they don't tell us. They leave that off stage. But I think what we see is Asuka's perspective, which is simply he dived in. Asuka's perspective is that he dived in of his own will to save her, putting himself in harm's way. And so, in that respect, I'm not sure it matters. Right? I'm not sure it matters. So, yeah. We can debate it, I guess, but I think that the important thing is how Asuka internalized that. That's the actual key character moment here. And if she never knows the truth one way or the other, it doesn't matter. It's how it affects her. So, very last thing to talk about this episode is the hot springs. So, here's another anime convention, right? The hot springs visit. The excuse to put to the protagonist and or their female interests into little or no clothing. And once again, it seems like, in the same way the hot springs are the reward to Asuka for completing her mission, that a hot springs episode, or has her in the swimsuit and all that, this has been promised to us, and now the hot springs have been promised to us. This is a reward for the audience, I guess. That appears to be what it's going to be at first. Especially at the end of the mission, we know there's no more high stakes, so let's see if I can find it. And it does serve that purpose as far as it being about adolescence and puberty and attraction, and he overhears the two of them, obviously touching each other and reacting, and it's his imagination's running wild here. I mean, the truth is, there's actually nothing sexual at all about what they say. She just says that, she was hit somewhere, and it could be like her face, right? It doesn't have to be something not PG, but that's where his mind goes anyway. It could have been like her shoulder, and where else she's touching her is somewhere else innocuous. But that's not at all what he's imagining. Maybe the "don't touch me" there, but I just want to point out that this is all his attention, and that. Then we get the throwback to the thermal expansion joke once again. But when we actually cut over to the girls and what you think must be, because we don't see the girls during any of that, right? This seems like it's going to be the actual fan service shot, okay? But yeah, like you're saying, again, the audience is Shinji. We're also imagining it must be something naughty going on since they won't show it to us, but we don't know that, right? But this appears like that's what it is, but what it actually is an opportunity for Asuka to see Misato's scar, and therefore for us to see Misato's scar. And she tells her where she gets it from, that she was caught in the second impact. You can see Asuka even has a moment where she is nervous about asking about it, right? But what it really does is, A, fill in that the second impact has personal stakes for Misato, in the same way that it had the much more minor but personal cost to Kaji earlier in the episode. This is the second time that the second episode has come up, and we have a reaction or something from Misato that suggests that her orientation to the second impact is different than everyone else's. That while everyone in the world was affected by the second impact, her effect was more immediate and personal than the general way that everyone was affected, right? And of course, let's not blow over the fact that she has a scar from that, whatever happened, right? Scar being a super obvious metaphor. But because of sharing that little bit of personal detail, that little bit of vulnerability, what we actually get, perhaps more importantly, is hearing of someone else's past trauma prompts Asuka to ask if she knows about her. Doesn't spell it out, but Misato at least tells us that that's ancient history. Don't let it bother you. I think that is actually literally the last scene of the episode too. Yeah. And so, for the first time, we are given a hint that Asuka has a shadow over her own past. But at the same moment that we learn just a little bit more about whatever shadow lies over Misato's past. So, again, this is relating the two of them to each other, echoing each other. But this is also a closing of distance between them, which is why it is actually an effective time to have them in the nude, stripped of pretense, stripped of clothing. This is not just to titillate the audience. It serves that purpose. It serves the purpose of titillating Shinji, but it also represents a lowering of the guard, a lowering of the things that separate people from each other. And I think that is one of the very good uses of nudity, is to show a lack of barriers, of vulnerability. Most people feel very vulnerable when they're nude, right? And it's nice to see them take the hot springs trope and do so much more with it, right? And it's such a short scene, too. Because you get humor on the one side, and again, reminded that poor Shinji is just a mess of hormones at this point in his life, and has no experience and no one to guide him. But on the other side of that, you have the two girls finding some commonality, lowering their barriers with each other a little bit further. And, of course, the audience being hinted, the two of them have some shadow across their past, and we will learn about it, probably, or we wouldn't bring it up. So I'm going to read y'all's comments for a second before we break to get to the next episode, which we didn't make up much time, did we? Are people ticklish on the face? People are ticklish on their neck. I've never dated a girl who wasn't. Yeah, the fact that Misato knows Asuka's past and knows how to diffuse it, well, should tell us retroactively that Misato probably knows a lot about Asuka and knows just how to get the reaction she needs out of her, which goes back and informs her decision-making during the magma descent, right? Like if she knows whatever makes Asuka tick, then that's useful information. And we should now go back and think of all the instances where Misato did things to tweak Asuka, like suggesting Rei take her place, or saying pushing her on, doing it over the open channel, that that needs to inform our understanding of Misato as well. So, yeah, no, sorry, y'all have great comments. Yeah, Misato is better equipped to read the two kids than they are to read each other. So, getting older, it's useful. Oh. All right. I think perhaps one of the useful things about this episode was emphasizing that Shinji has so much of Asuka's attention at this point, and how she has chosen to use her femininity, sexuality, attraction as her tool in dealing with that. And emphasizing again how much that also forms part of her personality. And I think it's increasingly difficult for Shinji to ignore his attraction. But he's kind of more like a side party to this whole episode. Yeah. Yeah, I think the conversation you're having about Misato, like, how do you apply a moral judgment to what she's doing, manipulating them, managing them? That is her job, right? It's a terrible burden that commanders in conflicts bear, is that you have to make decisions best for the mission and put aside the humans you are potentially putting at risk, or the humans or the people you're doesn't count in the case of the angels, but in normal war, you're also dooming other people to death. You're hoping it's just them and not your guys. But there is a certain distance you need to be able to put between you and people to be effective in that. In the same way that, like, doctors and paramedics have to put aside their empathy for a moment to do their job, and not get personally invested in every person they're taking care of. A commander has to know his troops and know his, in this case, the kids under command, well enough to know how to manage them, but not let the fact that they know them so well cloud their judgment, right? So Misato is a great character for the series. I mean, there's a really good reason she and Shinji are the ones we meet first and get so much emphasis. But yeah. I know. If only they didn't need pilots at all, right? Of course, in that case, I think the anthropic principle. Yeah. If only we didn't have pilots at all, but then we'd have no story, right? Sometimes things don't happen because the characters are in a story. Sometimes they're in a story because things happened, right? But again, at the moment we know there's some reason. It has to be these kids, and it has to be kids this age. And we can certainly make a tentative link between their age and the date of second impact. But we still don't know why. And we still don't know why it's so essential. But all the problems caused by having teenage pilots should tell us that there better be a really good reason it has to be like this. but we'll have to keep going to find out what that is. So, I'm going to take another break. 3 minutes. More than 3 minutes, probably. And we will do episode 11. I gotta put this on the shortcuts, so I stop doing this every time. Alrighty. Let's see. Hang on, music's too hot. Trying a slightly different track here, or a different playlist here, just to see how I like it. And, yeah. So, episode 11. For the first time, we expand out to see more than just Asuka conflicting with Rei, Asuka conflicting with Shinji, succeeding or not. What we have in this episode is a series of events that isolates little sections of our characters. And what it'll do repeatedly, and I really wish I had the clips for this, repeatedly we will cut between groups of characters in their own individualized crises, and it'll be everyone discovering that the phones aren't working at the same time, and everyone being the same control room that's controlling nothing, and of course the pilots having to problem solve with no one to guide them, and having to work with each other to get to the end. And each of their different personalities has an impact on how the story unfolds, how they deal with the crisis. And of course, Misato and Kaji will be isolated in a room by themselves, totally private. It's kind of a nice visual, physical way of reminding us how all of these groups have a character interaction, that they kind of like each of those little groups that we see are almost like subdivisions of our characters, and how they often have problems that face only them, only their little group of people, right? And yes, there's definitely like I'm sorry for the constant cutouts. I'll tell you from the people donated yesterday. The first day, that's going to pay for Adobe for next year and the radio. And I think I'm going to get a second audio interface and see if I can't isolate where this problem is, because while we can fix it quickly, it's quite the interruption. You know, it breaks everything up, and this already is a little bit schizophrenic at times. So may not solve that by the end of Evangelion, but finding a more permanent solution will be the goal. So no, you especially stop that. But no, I was trying to think of what everything should have a role, and this is probably that would probably be a good use. So anyway, let's get on to actual episode 11. One of the things I really like about this episode is if you remember episode 7, the Jet Alone episode, had the title of The Works of Man or Made by Man, and some of the kind of over-thematic things felt like comparing what science and technology were capable of versus what existed naturally, or was the divine, or was otherwise superhuman, right? This episode has a little bit of crossover with that, where it's all about how they cope when the technology and the science doesn't work. And it begins with some of these these little everyday scenes of just the nerve of the nerve. Sorry, I don't know why it reset on me. Of some of the nerve personnel just trying to do some very everyday things. They're waiting on their laundry, or they're picking up their dry cleaning, I guess is what they're actually doing. They are involved in just some very basic riding on the train. They get on the train going to work, I presume, and Fusky is there just reading the morning paper, like they don't have this really outlandish job. We can kind of tell the formality between Ritsuko and the I cut their names a couple times, but I'm obviously not pulling them off the top of my head. And it just seems very business as usual, right? It seems very a peek at the little everyday lives of some of the characters who we haven't focused on, to remind us that these are fully fledged characters who have their own lives outside of this, that they themselves are probably just as complex as the characters we have focused on. So this little minutia and this little showing us the everyday goes back to that high stakes, low stakes things I keep bringing up. The show contrasts so much. One of the things they talk about in this little scene, which I think again is set here, it could be set anywhere, but it's set here to create a situation where they would just talk freely about the technology. One of the things they're talking about is the Magi supercomputers. Now, something that's just come up, it's been mentioned, a couple of them been named, I think, and this is explaining to the audience the usefulness of it, and the fact that the city itself is effectively run by these computers, okay? So this again is introducing something into the story that we know will become important later, and they've been named before. We know they exist. This is telling us exactly how prominent their role is. And the fact that she laws this as a city of science, that they live in an age where science can solve all of our problems, is tempting fate, right? Like, that sets up the episode to sets up the rest of the episode to show us what happens when science can't solve all of our problems. So, nice little setup to... Really? Nice little setup to show us that science and technology has its limits, and my audio interface is doing us the grand favor of giving a great demonstration. Anyway, one thing science is not solving, one thing that it cannot for sure weigh in on, is a little more human problems. And one of the things that we have happen is early on, Shinji is trying to call up his father, and he's trying to see if he will come in for, it was effectively a parent-student conference, I guess. And it's been a minute since the two of them have talked, right? But despite seeing them around each other and all that, I don't know how many episodes now it's been since the two of them spoke to each other, right? But this just reminds us, in case we've forgotten, what their relationship is. Okay, that Shinji, for all the confidence he has probably gained from being the Eva pilot, from all of the successes he's had making friends, figuring out at least how to kind of deal with Asuka, acclimating to being Misato's roommate, his father is still something he can't deal with. Alright? That's still something way beyond his ability to cope. And the thing he's trying to ask his father about is about the future plans, parent-teacher conference thing. The thing that Misato, I think, was coming for originally when she showed up at school all dolled up, right? And we pointed out then the fact that it's not Gendo was significant. And even in the scene where he's now actually asking Gendo to, in fact, be the one that does it, and maybe that is progress as far as Shinji goes, Gendo will indicate that that is something that he put Misato in charge of. And he will go on to say that he doesn't want to be bothered to have his time wasted, with this nonsense. So, aside from reminding us that their relationship hasn't really progressed, gotten better, it shows us that where Misato last time was worried about his schooling and Asuka's schooling and thinking about the future and what he might be beyond being an Eva pilot, to his father, that's nonsense. Okay? There's not even an apology or saying, that's the best. Don't waste my time. Alright? That is quite the judgment. That is not I'm so busy or I would. This is just, please dispense, And so, I talked about the fact that Misato cares, indicates that the kind of world she thinks that they are building is one in which it will matter that Shinji think about his future plans. And at this point, it doesn't seem like it's a high priority to Gendo. Now, is that simply because Shinji is such a low priority on a personal level? Or is it because Gendo himself, doesn't think beyond the mission in front of him, beyond being the head of NERV, beyond being the one in charge of defeating the angels, and the human instrumentality program, and whatever else is going on that we don't know about? Is he so dismissive of this because of what he thinks the future will be, or because of the focus he has on things right now? Whatever it is, it's nonsense. It wastes his time. I mean, he's not just like curt and, not just like busy and brushes him off. He's almost angry. I mean, this is a rebuke, right? And for a guy who appears to derive his identity and power from being the head of NERV, and that's certainly the most important thing in his life, to thus put so little emphasis and priority on his son and the son's future plans and meeting with his parents and all that, I think is, in the context of this episode, is probably showing that Gendo is a man of science. Gendo is a guy who believes in science and technology. And having all that collapse in the middle of this episode, like it does, feels to me like it's a little bit of a judgment against him. Like it's a little bit of a undermining his own position, his own absolute authority. You know what I'm saying? And but it certainly tells us that we've had no progress on that. It's kind of the thing we've actually kind of forgotten about, right? Because Shinji's made so much progress and other things, and Asuka makes things so much more interesting. Kind of forget that, like, this all started with Gendo looming over Shinji and the relationship being very clear to everyone out of the gate, to the point where Misato adopts him like he's a lost puppy. And yeah, just in case you've forgotten, things don't seem better at all. In this particular instance, they seem worse. This is way more aggressive than originally. But I want to read this notification real quick. From Asuka is best girl. Glad we can help you out. Yeah, thank you. And it's I mean, all of it is going into trying to make this better. So, although we were inadvertently starting the wars up again. Anyway, that was most of what I want to point out about that scene, and how, in context of the way science is set up to fail this time, and Gendo being the figurehead of that, it makes me wonder if we're not supposed to see Gendo as a little more vulnerable than we had before now. Now, while there's no progress between him and his father, right? There is a little bit of progress that we find out, I think, almost immediately, because the night very next scene, where obviously this exchange with his father is upsetting, and the call actually gets cut off. That's actually the first clue we have that the power has gone down, and we see people get trapped and everyone gets segregated where they are. We won't go all through that, but what happens is Shinji just realized the phone was cut off, and everybody else is panicking. Everyone else says it's impossible. We find out, basically, they give us enough information to know that whatever it was that caused this power outage is not just like the power outage, okay? This isn't like me on day one where the thunder literally knocked my power line off and we stopped the stream. This is not supposed to happen. And they talk about the duplicate and triplicate backups and all the reasons this can't happen. That their science and their technology should be bulletproof, that it should be fine. And the couple of things it does for us, this little bit of scrambling and all that stuff, we do see Fuyusuki be emotional again, panicked in this situation, at least at first, is we come to eventually figure out that this had to be done on purpose. This could not have just been happenstance. And it's a mystery that's not solved inside the episode. Was it angels? Was it humans? That someone says that who would have guessed that it would be human activity, not angel activity, that brings the whole place low for the first time. But hello, welcome. Yes, we're still going. I'm doing run over time again. Not as bad as yesterday, but whether it's true or not, the fact that they believe that this must be humans taking him down, that this was an inside job or some other kind of sabotage, becomes I'm not going to find it, I'm sorry, is that the problem with human creations, going back to Jet alone, the problem with humans is other humans. Then I'm pretty sure it's Gendo says this later, that man's greatest enemy is his fellow man. Alright? Certainly the way Nerve interfere with the whole Jet alone thing, and the way they were hostile towards Nerve in the first place, helps emphasize that even in science, even that the community supposedly dedicated to human advancement, humans are the problem. And in the Eva world, in the Evangelion piloting system, the pilots are often the problem. The human element is the problem, but it's incredibly necessary because of the way this world works. And I think the idea that the power outage here, that the supposedly, impossible happens as a result of humans, or they believe it's a result of humans at least, just underscores that. Like, just a big... They could have just had it happen because of angels. It could have just been an angel who just attacked it and somehow got through it. The idea that it was intentionally done by the humans, that humans get in each other's way, even in the face of apocalypse, it's quite the commentary, right? Now, one thing I want to talk about, when I talked about how there has been no progress between Shinji and his father, but there has been progress between him and his fellow pilots. Because as upsetting as that was, and as off-putting, and as I'm sure it stung to be rebuked like that, despite the vulnerability there, he's able to share the story with them, right? Like, this is him relaying what just happened to Asuka, to Rei, and that's progress, right? Being able to share that little bit of vulnerability, to be able to confide in his fellow pilots, indicates that he is making some progress, at least on that front. That while he and his father have not advanced, and it reminds us of that, he and his fellow pilots have advanced, and that scene reminds us of that. And this is the same incident, or reminds us of both sets of situations, right? Now, once they do realize what's happened, once everyone is scrambling to solve things, Rei's the one who remembers that they have protocol for this. She gets a little book out, and as soon as Asuka sees that, she rushes to do the same, to be the one who does the right thing. And of course, she insists they choose a leader, and she of course volunteers herself. And what will happen throughout here is, I won't be able to fetch clips to do all of it. I'm sorry. Starting tomorrow, every one of these episodes will be clipped out. We'll be fine. But for now, you just have to struggle with me. Yeah, technology is greatest strength and their greatest weakness. That definitely calls out. It's something I said the other day, that the hand that gives is also the hand that takes away at times. And I didn't mean to be such a self-demonstrating example between the power outage day one and the constant audio problems, but yeah, I don't need a story to tell me this, right? But in the sense of like the works of man being fallible and vulnerable versus the works of whatever, it does double duty inside the story. Anyway, once our three pilots are isolated and trying to problem solve on their own, each one of their personalities takes center stage. Each one of their personalities guides what's going to happen. Asuka wants to be the leader. Asuka wants to be the one who makes the decisions. Shinji's mostly along for the ride. Rei knows the right things to do, but doesn't insist upon them. She simply tries to follow the book, tries to follow the protocol. She actually knows the answer and doesn't insist on it. And Asuka, you have a situation where they once they discover there is an angel and they've got to get down there, where Asuka's personality puts everyone in jeopardy, right? And when out in when it's out in when they're outside, when it's just the three of them as their pilots in their school uniforms, I think, trying to find their way down there, each one of their personalities is on full display, and the way they conflict or interact and often get in the way of the mission is on full display. Obviously, Asuka is the main culprit for that, but everyone else, all the adults, are going through all the things that they need to do to get things online. Yeah, oh, sorry, I just found it. I think it's funny. We have the cutting between all the phone lines, all the characters experiencing the same things. We have a similar one between the where Asuka volunteers Shinji to be the guy who's the elbow grease. He's the one that does the manual labor, and he complains, of course, that this is the only time she ever turns to his help when she needs him to do the dirty work. At the same moment, our poor generals feel the same way about being put upon when nerve can't be reached. So what I like about this, that even the guys who are not there on site and affected by it, is that we cut through everyone to show how everyone feels like a little bit cut off. All these little groups have their own kind of ecosystem and the way they compete and interact with each other. So it's kind of a clever way to divide all these subgroups up and let us see how they interact when they aren't having to work with each other. And other than Asuka insisting on making all the decisions and taking some of the choices and making the turns that might be wrong, taking them in circles, what happens a lot, I'll just see if I can find it, is that Asuka, the way how threatened she feels by Rei comes out again and again, right? It gets really, she's very easily, she is no longer so antagonistic towards Shinji as she once was. Now a lot of that ire is directed at Rei. Even though Rei is not tweaking her on purpose, right? Rei is just doing what she does. Go through protocol, do what she's supposed to do. Very little imagination beyond that. And she even starts calling her, I don't know what the transliterate is, but she makes a little Miss Perfect nickname for her. Which, yes, it's a pejorative, but like the choice of Miss Perfect, I think, says how she feels threatened by her. That her seeming perfection, her seeming inability to make the very visible mistakes that Asuka has made, because Asuka insists on being so visible, really undermine her confidence, which really gets under her skin. So, we have a new queen. See, Rei is best girl, and it kind of looks like Magi style. We actually have a consensus. We actually have a 2-to-3 vote on that. 2-to-1 vote on that. Anyway, I'll switch back. I'll see if I can find the same thing I want to talk about. But it's by isolating everyone and putting them down in the situation, we get to see a side of some characters in sharper focus than normally. And there's a great, I don't want to dwell too much about them trying to work their way down, the three of them. I think we covered the main thing. Put upon Shinji, bold and brash Asuka, but still makes mistakes. Rei quietly making the right choice, but they're not the only ones, right? We have Kaji and Misato isolated, and being thrown together with him against her will really irks her. And there's less action development on them than I would have expected from the situation. But I think the fact that she doesn't see that as opportunity, but a great imposition, still goes back to the part of her when she's not feeling the attraction and the unresolved sexual tension between them is not foremost in her mind. That really his little proclivities annoy her, bother her, maybe remind her of parts of herself she doesn't like, remind her of a past that we don't know about yet that maybe she doesn't like. Shinji supports. So that's all. That's really all I feel like we can read out of that. I mean, there's little minor things, but not enough to stop over. But one of the more interesting things that we kind of find out, and there's a little bit of humor, is there's two things. I'm sorry. The humor is when they're in the room, and Ritsuko looks around at and remarks on how calm that Gendo um, and Fuyutsuki, I always struggle with his name, um, seem to be. And then it cuts to show that they're not actually that chill. They have their feet down in water to stay cool, and have this little soft-spoken exchange with each other about the fact that the water is warm. And it's just it undermines that very cool exterior that the rest of them look at and take them to. That they are human also. Let's not forget that stripping away the technology, they're also uncomfortable, right? They are also dependent in some small way, but they put that front up. Now, the other thing involving Gendo, and it's obviously significant because of how much they focus on it, is when they discover the angel's coming and they have to prepare. He's ready to do whatever it takes. He goes down there, he pitches in, he starts the diesel generators, he goes ahead and gets all of the preparation work done, and he does it because he assumes the pilots will get there. Everyone else says, "Where are the pilots?" And he has perfect faith they're going to show up, which I don't think we would have assumed of him before now. I think the way he treated them and the way he treated Shinji earlier, that's part of the reason they probably put that exchange at the beginning of this episode, is it feels like he thinks very little of his pilots and that they're expendable and all this, and that maybe he has no faith in them, maybe he has no confidence in them, maybe he wishes he had any other situation to deal with. But the way he mobilizes absolutely everyone to prepare for them because they're going to come, and gets down there and gets involved in the physical labor himself to make sure they're ready when the pilots get there, actually tells us a lot about it. And perhaps more key than us seeing that is that Shinji gets to see it. That they did this by hand. That it's Gendo's idea, that he's up there putting in his own sweat and blood, and the fact that he did it because he had faith in them. And someone said, like, this episode is a good job of humanizing Gendo. I agree. Gendo has been an enigma, really, and all we really know about him is the curtness he shows towards Shinji, and the apparent favoritism he's shown toward Rei, and that's all we've kind of seen out of him. But to see the imperfect side of him, right? The fact that he would put that facade up in the middle of crisis at first, even though he had his feet chilling in the bucket of what I probably was ice, but then became water. When it came down to it, when the angel was actually attacking, the facade didn't matter anymore. Now he's the one that rushes to action. Now he's the one that takes command and makes it happen and puts himself out there. And it shows us a side of him that we hadn't seen, I don't think. Not really. And we'd seen him do it as far as pulling Rei out of her pod, right? But we could have written that off to a special relationship between him and Rei up until this point. And now we see that while he moves in the shadows and pretends likes to be the man in charge and having everyone else do it and being inscrutable, when it's a difference between succeeding or not, he'll get his hands dirty, right? He'll get his hands burned. Now that instance with Rei doesn't quite seem as singular, right? Now it's maybe a little less about it's just Rei he cares about. Or at the very least, he's a guy maybe there's not a line, right? That if it serves the purpose of meeting whatever his goal is in front of him that moment, he'll step away from the desk. He'll help set things up manually. He'll get himself all dirty and sway and not look like the dignified leader above it and apart from everyone. He's right there in the thick of it with the rest of his guys, with people whose names we'll never know in the series. He probably doesn't know, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing that they want us to see how much faith he has in them showing up, that he's confident in that, in comparison to everyone else wondering why they're getting ready, right? It'd be one thing if everyone kind of said, we can get ready just in case. We should set up things just in case they make their way here. Whereas he insists, no, let's get ready now. They're going to show. Against, not the protest, but against the prevailing belief of everyone else, right? I don't know. What else I want to say? Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, you can definitely argue with whether or not, that's how it's presented to us, right? And it's how Shinji internalized it, because that's what Ritsuko tells him. Now, we can also argue instead that it just has to work, because there's not another option. So let's prepare for it. Or that he just always believes that things will eventually work out. Kind of like when occasionally there'll be a plan and people's like, are you sure about this? And you'll see him kind of have this satisfied smile hidden under his hands. That maybe some part of him just always thinks it's going to work out his way, and that's why they need to prepare. Maybe it has nothing to do with the pilots or him believing in them, right? But at the same time, what else are you going to do? And, maybe you're right. Maybe it is actually that Shinji's the best girl. And that is why Gendo has so much faith in them. Anyway. And yeah, you're right. It also shows that this is also something Shinji doesn't know about his father. But this is one more barrier and bit of ignorance, right? Now, once we actually get everyone set up and all the efforts, and you see how everyone has to come together without their science, right? Like, without the technology, without the artifice of man, they are still able to meet the threat, right? Just through pure elbow grease, through pure grit and gristle, right? And I think having him get in there, yes, it humanizes him, but it also shows that he is part of humanity and part of the human struggles quite apart from artificial things, right? And so the fact they're able to launch the Avas required everyone except Misato and Kaji, which the fact they're isolated in all this, I'm sure means something. It requires all these people to come together. It requires the dude who, takes the political campaign van and uses it to announce everyone to take cover, and drives it all the way down Nerve to let them know an angel is coming in the first place. I love how that was set up too. Like, we get to talk about how the Magi actually decide things in the city, and so then we know people are up for election, and so there's actually a good reason for this thing to be driving around for him before he takes it. And anyway, he was part of that. All the people who were able to divert the power to the few things they needed power, starting up the diesel generators, even having to cut the lines to release them with the axes, right? Like, this was a giant effort of human hands, and everyone basically had to get involved. But once we get to that point, once we actually get to the Ava pilots in their Avas, they're gone to meet the threat, And once again, the angels have a surprise in store. In this case, it's a kind of corrosive thing coming out of its eye, mouth, whatever's going on there. I just love how they go all over the map with the designs. We have a couple of scene mirrors. I won't be able to fetch them, but like where they were crawling through the vents earlier, and Asuka was trying to keep Shinji from, she assumed, trying to look up a skirt or something like that, and feeling undignified about it. And when they're in there having Evangelions, and they're crawling through, not vents, but again, she again finds it undignified, so there's again that seeing herself in it, seeing the Evangelion as an extension of herself, not just something she pilots, not a vehicle. But when they actually get in this battle, despite all the problems they had, despite all the infighting, despite all of the... Sorry, I see the person that clipped that. Despite all of the ways their personalities got in the way of the mission when they were outside their Avas, when they're actually in the mission, it's the first time all three of them have fought together. And it's exemplary. They meet the unexpected threat. They have to think on their feet to deal with it. And they're able to respond to crisis, right? They come up with a quick plan. And the important thing about the plan is... sorry, I'm trying to find this one I actually do want to make sure I show you. Oh yeah, well, this is not what I was looking for, but just to keep reminding us how not biological or not human or not normal these things are. I just love how they roll through so many different designs to emphasize that. Yeah, they'll occasionally tease how human-like they are. Like the embryo, the unhatched thing last time had a very human, a little bit of a human thing to it, a little cast to it. But this time they go completely in the opposite direction. Anyway, that's not actually what I was looking for. When it actually comes time for them as a team, as Evangelion pilots, to put up or shut up the roles they were in earlier, I guess, that were not working for them when they were trying to find their way through to get everything down, it is actually Asuka who becomes the leader again. She comes up with the plan. She gives their assignments, defense, support, and offense, and explains the roles. And that's a good plan. It's a great plan, as it turns out. And everyone else lets her lead in this case. And once they're there's even let me show this great shot when they're like conferring together. And they're all, the Evangelions themselves are almost like in a conference, like they're sharing conversation to each other. So which again, help remind us that the two share a lot of overlap, that they're kind of one and the same. But Asuka gives the plan, and Rei is the one who immediately suggests that she'll be the expendable one. She'll be, not expendable, but defense. She'll be the one who puts herself in harm's way, right? So this is her, again, the personalities coming out in their thing, the way she thinks of herself. But I mentioned last time how Asuka seems to have a strange sense of honor when it comes to battle. And the reason she says, the whole reason she's going to do it is because it's dangerous. Because you saved my life before, I have to repay it. I have to clear the debt. So, just like her not liking the 2-on-1 nature of the original fight last time, she has this strange bit of kind of warrior code, like honor, going on, right? And we can debate if that's just an excuse for her, if that's just a reason for her to put herself in harm's way, that what she really is doing is creating a situation where Shinji can be the one who shoots because some part of her knows that he is better in that role, and that Rei is better in a support role. We can debate that, I guess. But at the very least, the excuse she gives, she doesn't mind acknowledging the debt and the fact that she wants to wipe it out, right? So it's an interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting how when they're Evangelions, when it's really crisis time, their personalities don't change, but their personalities in this instance help, right? They are effective in the roles the way she assigns them. And we don't have to roll through the whole thing, but I found it pretty interesting to contrast how much their personalities got in the way in the first part of the episode and how important they were to the actual success at the end, right? And yes, they had to trust each other. This only works if they work as a team. And this is the first time we've seen all three of them in their Evangelions with the same goal at the same time. And it's a success. And no one's in their ear trying to help them. No information is fed to them. It proves that, I guess it proves they're the right people for the job, but it certainly proves that they can work together if they just will do so. If they just will work together, they can do it. Even with Asuka as leader, even in the crisis situation, even with Rei trying to sacrifice herself when maybe that's not the best role. I don't know. It's an interesting way to show how at the end there, when all the science and technology failed, and great human effort got them into their Avas, got the thing together, and yet it was just Asuka's own ingenuity and each of their own personalities and ability to work with a team in that moment that saves the day. Not some amazing tech, not some amazing scientific undertaking, not the work of someone else, I guess. It's no one else's plan. Misato's not there to save them. The UN's not there to provide a diversion. There's no backup rifles. They have to solve that problem, right? And so I like how on the big scale and the small scale, them trying to figure out how to deal with the loss of tech forms kind of the focus of this episode. And the way that relates to the whole rest of the series, right? This will be one we'll have to come back and talk about down the line, basically. But I like that this is a great time for it, where we are right now. We're not quite to halfway. Then to go ahead and bring Rei back on stage, make it very clear how she and Asuka feel, or at least how Asuka feels towards her, and yet to show them that is not, right now, that is not that's not a failure condition, right? That is not enough to jeopardize all this. So, yeah, there's one last little bit. I know we've run way over. There is a tiny another peek at their personalities right at the end, when they've won the day and they have gone to the overlook of the city. And you could go all the way through this series and just find all the times there's a scene where people are looking over the city and compare them to each other and where the story is at that moment. We can't do that at this moment, but they're looking out over the city, right? And observing what it looks like without power, and they have got a different take on how it looks. One of them thinks it is deserted, that it feels, I don't know, threatening, or that you feel more secure with the lights on. And Rei hits us with this little quote that man fears the darkness, and so he scrapes away at the edges of it with fire, which I think in this case, fire probably stands in pretty well as a metaphor for the works of humans' hands, right? For the human technology we were talking about. But, and I've gone too far. Hold on. Sorry. Of course, Asuka's going to take a moment to poke fun. But Shinji then wonders if, A, that's what makes humanity special, the The fact that we scrape at the edge, that we create something like fire to push back against the thing we fear. But B, wondering if that's why the angels are after them. Is it because of what man does by creating, by changing the world, by bringing into the world things that are natural, by making artifice? He wonders if could this be what the angels hold against us? And sorry, I lost my audio again. How about now? Okay. That one actually disrupted my train of thought. This has been an unintentionally effective way to show this, huh? No, I lost it. I lost where I was going with that. I'm sorry. Yeah, the music's kind of... It's like a synthwave playlist. I thought it might be appropriate for Evangelion. We try it out. I know I skipped over the everyone discovering Misato and Kaji. What looks like a compromising position, but we know is nothing of the sort. But the one thing I wanted to add on to that scene, I skipped ahead on purpose, is they have different takes on it. Rather, it begins by saying, I had no idea that the stars were this pretty without electricity. Alright. So they can actually see them, right? Without artificial light, right? And so, I think this whole episode is definitely setting up a kind of nature versus artifice thing. But figure out how to articulate this. But I think it is taken for granted by the kids right now that having the lights on is better, that having the technology is better. This is a new perspective to Shinji, that the natural order, the no artificial... I think it's Shinji who says this. Pretty sure. He's the more curious one. Or more introspective one. That's what I'm looking for. That it never occurred to him that there was another way, or that there might be some beauty in the darkness, in the lack of artificial things, and seeing the way everyone was still able to come together despite that may even be part of what's in Spooling's mind there. Now, it's taken for granted, of course, that this is the reason we invented fire. The reason we wield fire. Whatever fire represents. The things man makes to push back the dark, right? And we have a whole episode of seeing what happens when it fails. And seeing that things are harder, but we manage. And at the very end, there's this beautiful starlit sky as a result, right? I mean, it's really hard to ignore the thematic resonance of that, right? That it's asking us in the audience to have this same thought. But not by offering this as the answer, not ending with the lights still off, but bringing them back on and having them talk about it, and having Shinji further wonder if the fact that man scrapes at the darkness with fire, technology, with whatever it is we do, is the reason they're acting the way they are. The fact that he is wondering about the motives of the angels at all. And, just to help remind us that that some things don't change, when Shinji proposes that maybe that's why the angels are attacking us, Asuka rebukes him. How can we know something like that? It's a great question. Will we find out? I don't know. I mean, even the shot pans up to the stars at the end. So I think there is a very deliberate decision to not take a position by the storytellers. All right? By the way, this is directed to show us both answers, pose that question, and not privilege one or the other. To have her rebuke him and then be comfortable in the light, then to still end by panning up at those beautiful stars that they can see for the first time. It's giving us both options, right? It's not choosing one for us, I think. So, yeah. I think that's all I really want to talk about this episode. Is there anything is that it? Yeah, I think that's all I thought was really worth dwelling over. I'm just going to read our comments real quick to catch myself up. And in a minute here, we will have the all spoiler-free discussion. Short version. I got work to do to make sure this clipping works for tomorrow. And eat. I haven't eaten at all. Yeah, sense of curiosity. You said it too. Shinji has this introspective, and curiosity is part of that. And in this case, I think it's actually pretty natural to wonder what drives the angels. We've been given the hint that there's something they're after, that there's something they're looking for. At first, it was provided to us that it must be something in Nerve HQ, and then at the end of the 8th episode, we see the Atom specimen, and it's suggested that that, in fact, is what they are after. Or at least that one angel was. But having a goal, right, having a thing they want, is not the same thing as wondering why this goal, right? When we do the normal analysis, I split out plot into both goals and conflicts, right? And a large part of that reason is because trying to figure out why someone has a goal will help us understand why a plot is going the way it is and why a character behaves the way it is. It helps carve out our understanding of both those elements. And so in this case, if we were doing that here, we would have had Angel's unknown goal written on the board from the beginning, and that's still what it would say. We would have okay, maybe it's a goal to get to Nerve HQ, but why? Maybe it's a goal to get Atom, but why? And I think it's unusual that there's not more conversation about this. When you're being attacked, when you're in a war, as one of you saying, don't you wonder why? I mean, it's very easy, and it's a tactic to dehumanize whoever you're in a war with. They're just obviously wrong and obviously inhuman, subhuman. There's some terrible examples of that in history. But I think a lot of people occasionally have that moment of introspection of, well, why? Why are we doing this? Not why are we fighting? Why is there something we disagree about so much that it has to come to this? And the angels, of course, are set up as unknowable, and that's why Asuka chastises him. They're obviously so inscrutable. They're so beyond the understanding of man that why are you even wondering? Why are you wasting your time on this? But I think isn't that the essential question? Isn't that the thing to figure out? If you understood what they wanted, why they were attacking it, why are they going to all this, maybe there's a different solution than all this. I don't know. I think it is kind of interesting that no one else seems to want to know, right? And maybe this is why Shinji is makes such a good perspective character to this madness, right? Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, it could be that some of his interest is related to being interested in the Avas. But we talked about him being curious about the way the entry plug smelled like blood and yet made him feel comfortable. He's definitely wondered about the nature of all this before. And Asuka and Rei, by contrast, very much are just go with the flow. So maybe his ponderings just range all over, and that's alien to them. That's possible. Rei and Asuka don't know the true nature of the Avas, that there's something biological under there. Yeah, I agree. The more unknowable the angels are, the more intriguing their reasons for attacking will be. It definitely, like, they're setting up a... There better be a good reason, right? The problem with extending a mystery like this is the payoff has to be better and better to justify how long you've waited to find out. And you just hope it's not disappointing, right? You just hope it lives up to your expectations. And yeah, I know. I see we're having a debate about technology and so forth. I think that's intentional. I think you're supposed to come away not being given one answer or the other. I think that's a lot of what's going on this episode, is showing how some of the relationships almost collapse upon themselves or go get turned. The boiling point gets turned up on them, right? But at the same time, yeah, they are ultimately protected by this technology that they've put together. They require both the tech and their human hands to pull off. And I don't think it's choosing sides, right? I just think it wants us to have this conversation. I think it wants us to debate this, basically, by not villainizing one or the other, right? And I think this is a great point in the series to do that, right? Because it's not specifically, it's not a theme we've had all the time, but between this one and the Jet Alone episode, it's now like they're trying to make sure that's in our mind, I think. So, yes, I also love it. I love it when the audience is asked to do the interpretations. Yeah, if you were here for the super extended Q&A yesterday, we won't try to repeat that only on the regular, but one of the things I talked about was how much I don't like it when artists try to interpret their own work, and one of the big reasons is how it crowds out other interpretations. And that is actually relevant to Evangelion, since the director wouldn't shut up about his own work for a while. And I think it's better like this. I think it's better to give a situation where you can argue the merits of multiple choices, that you can interpret that and internalize it in a way that makes sense to you, or start a conversation where you can find out more or change your perspective by hearing someone else's interpretation. I mean, I feel like that kind of posing the question and not answering it, maybe giving answers but not answering it, seems like one of the main reasons to do art, right? It's a way of communicating. Let's not get too philosophical, but art itself is man-made. It's artifice. And while at the same time being able to exalt beauty and exalt the nature and exalt the lack of artifice, if that's a thing, which itself has a bit of built-in irony to it. Yeah, I mean, soldiers should, when they go to war, often think, why am I having to do this? But yeah, usually it's simply because someone's telling you to. That's just the nature of militaries have to work that way. You can't ask how everyone feels about putting their life on the line each day, right? Not if you want to be effective. And there are enough people who feel like they get more than they risk by signing up, or they believe in it enough to risk. And a lot of this series, by having a child soldiers in focus, gives us another way to focus on that internal dilemma. Like, what is worth this to you? Is being ordered to just enough? One of the things, it might seem like they're going in circles when Shinji tries to leave earlier, or gives up and runs away. That might seem like it's just kind of a character thing for him to go through. But it actually also tells us that these pilots can walk away, right? They aren't conscripted. Even with the fate of humanity at stake, they're not going to be thrown in a black site somewhere. They're not going to be thrown into a black site or something otherwise. That despite, even if there are consequences, they still have some choice. That if it ever gets too terrible. So the point of that is to say that they are still choosing to do this each time. Right? It actually makes them a little bit different than soldiers in an army who can't desert. Right? So it is definitely interesting to see the reasons they keep choosing to volunteer. Almost, it's kind of a negative consent, but you know what I mean. Yeah, and it's actually, you're talking about how it's good for people to decide democratically. We're seeing more and more that NeRV intentionally subverts democratic process, both the way they set up the jet alone failure and the way they have their Magi supercomputers actually running the city with the facade of humans being the ones doing it, which in context of this episode is, telling. But at the same time, those supercomputers are set up to decide democratically amongst themselves, right? Kind of interesting. It's an interesting tension, isn't it? But it also means that NeRV isn't interested in consensus. They aren't interested in sharing power. They aren't interested in sharing decision making. They guard their reputation. That's what he was so upset about last episode. And I think it's because of that reputation safeguards that power, that ability to do what they want. And on the nation level, you would hope the prevailing attitudes of the people might hold sway. At least that's how a lot of cultures feel at this point in its history. But inside militaries, it's not a democracy. Not ever. It doesn't work that way, right? I mean, it wouldn't work that way, is what I mean. Because of the type of situations soldiers are asked to be in. So there's a bit of built-in irony in requiring such an undemocratic process and system to guard the possibility to have other things be democratically decided. Magi's worst girl. Whoa. Easy. Maybe there is no best girl. Only good girls. Yeah, I mean, quite apart from everything else we're talking about, the best girl thing is one of those things that's amusing, but like, all it takes is a few people to take it. All it takes is a few people to take it a little bit too far and to get hung up on little things before it stops becoming all fun and games, right? So, yeah. Let me take just a minute. Let me turn the screen off. And when I come back, we'll do all spoilers allowed. We can talk about the whole thing. It's going to be short this time. It's only supposed to ever be 30 minutes. What am I now? The hour and a half over run line time anyway. We'll keep it short, but we will do it. I wanted to make sure there was an opportunity to do this every day because I know sometimes going through these new things occur to you. I have one thing I want to talk about myself, and we'll keep it together. So we're going to take a minute, I'm gonna put the be right back screen on, if it'll actually stay up this time. I don't know what happened. And when I come back, all spoilers are allowable. Okay. Yeah, it was supposed to end some time ago. Oh, you're right. Sorry, half an hour ago. Right. Only half hour. Good. That's progress. That's progress. And yeah, so if you don't want to hear the spoilers, you don't want to hear beyond this, if you're watching this as we go along, and I'm trying to make it really feasible for people to do that, because I think that's such a cool way to experience something with other people, then this is your chance to bow out. I would go ahead and get out of here and not wreck it, because this is a spoiler vulnerable series, to be sure. And yeah, I'm gonna turn the be right back screen on again. I gotta take something for my back. My posture's no good today. And then we will do half an hour-ish of spoiler-free discussion. Yeah, how much discussion? How much break time? Let's say 5 minutes. That's enough time to make something. Get a little drink, but I don't want to drag this too far out. So, make the fire. I know, gosh. Yeah, well. Yeah, 5 minutes. If you got a thought you wanted to finish about the current thing, and you, before we get into all spoilers, go ahead and make it in those 5 minutes. I'll try to read them when I come back. But yeah, I keep saying this. This is not 10 minutes. I'm sorry, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 twice. 5 minutes in real time. 5 minutes in theta time. All right. 5 minutes. I'm even gonna set a timer so I know how far I went over. See you in a sec.